Good evening, dear listener. Tonight, we open the pages of one of the most enchanting tales ever told. But before we begin, if these quiet stories bring you peace, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. I'd truly love to know where you're listening from and what hour of the night finds you here. Our little circle now stretches across oceans, bound by stories and calm. So dim the lights, let the air grow still, and let your mind wander gently with me into tonight's story. Little Tuk. Yes, they called him Little Tuk, but it was not his real name. He had called himself so before he could speak plainly, and he meant it for Charles. It was all very well for those who knew him, but not for strangers. Little Tuk was left at home to take care of his little sister, Gustava, who was much younger than himself, and he had to learn his lessons at the same time, and the two things could not very well be performed together. The poor boy sat there with his sister on his lap and sung to her all the songs he knew, and now and then he looked into his geography lesson that lay open before him. By the next morning, he had to learn by heart all the towns in Zealand and all that could be described of them. His mother came home at last and took little Gustava in her arms. Then Tuk ran to the window and read so eagerly that he nearly read his eyes out, for it had become darker and darker every minute, and his mother had no money to buy a light. "There goes the old washerwoman up the lane," said the mother as she looked out of the window. The poor woman can hardly drag herself along, and now she had to drag a pail of water from the well. "Be a good boy, Tuk, and run across and help the old woman, won't you?" So Tuk ran across quickly and helped her. But when he came back into the room, it was quite dark, and there was not a word said about a light. So he was obliged to go to bed on his little truckle bedstead, and there he lay and thought of his geography lesson, and of Zealand, and of all the master had told him. He ought really to have read it over again, but he could not for want of light. So he put the geography book under his pillow, for he had heard that this was a great help towards learning a lesson, but not always to be depended upon. He still lay thinking and thinking, when all at once it seemed as if someone kissed him on his eyes and mouth. He slept, and yet he did not sleep, and it appeared as if the old washerwoman looked at him with kind eyes and said, "It would be a great pity if you did not know your lesson tomorrow morning. You helped me, and now I will help you. And Providence will always keep those who help themselves." And at the same time, the book under Tuk's pillow began to move about. "Cluck, cluck, cluck," cried a hen as she crept towards him. "I am a hen from Kyoga." And then she told him how many inhabitants the town contained, and about a battle that had been fought there, which really was not worth speaking of. Crack, crack. Down fell something. It was a wooden bird, the parrot which is used as a target as Prasto. He said there were as many inhabitants in that town as he had nails in his body. He was very proud and said, "Thorwaldsen lived close to me, and here I am now, quite comfortable." But now little Tuk was no longer in bed. All in a moment he found himself on horseback. Gallop, gallop, away he went, seated in front of a richly attired knight with a waving plume, who held him on the saddle, and so they rode through the wood by the old town of Wordingberg, which was very large and busy. The king's castle was surrounded by lofty towers, and radiant light streamed from all the windows. Within there were songs and dancing. King Waldemar and the young, gaily dressed ladies of the court were dancing together. Morning dawned, and as the sun rose, the whole city and the king's castle sank suddenly down together. One tower after another fell, till at last only one remained standing on the hill where the castle had formerly been. The town now appeared small and poor, and the schoolboys read in their books, which they carried under their arms, that it contained 2,000 inhabitants. But this was a mere boast, for it did not contain so many. And again Little Tuk lay in his bed, scarcely knowing whether he was dreaming or not, for someone stood by him. "Tuk, Little Tuk," said a voice. It was a very little person who spoke. He was dressed as a sailor and looked small enough to be a middy, but he was not one. "I bring you many greetings from Corsair. It is a rising town, full of life. It has steamships and mail coaches. In times past they used to call it ugly, but that is no longer true. I lie on the seashore," said Corsair. "I have high roads and pleasure gardens. I have given birth to a poet who is witty and entertaining, which they are not all. I once wanted to fit out a ship to sail round the world, but I did not accomplish it, though most likely I might have done so. But I am fragrant with perfume, for close to my gates most lovely roses bloom." Then before the eyes of Little Tuk appeared a confusion of colors, red and green, but it cleared off, and he could distinguish a cliff close to the bay, the slopes of which were quite overgrown with verdure, and on its summit stood a fine old church with pointed towers. Springs of water flowed out of the cliff in thick waterspouts, so that there was a continual splashing. Close by sat an old king with a golden crown on his white head. This was King Hror of the Springs, and near the springs stood the town of Roskilde, as it is called. Then all the kings and queens of Denmark went up the ascent to the old church, hand in hand, with golden crowns on their heads, while the organ played and the fountains sent forth jets of water. Little Tuk saw and heard it all. "Don't forget the names of these towns," said King Hror. All at once everything vanished. But where? It seemed to him like turning over the leaves of a book. And now there stood before him an old peasant woman who had come from Sorøy, where the grass grows in the marketplace. She had a green linen apron thrown over her head and shoulders, and it was quite wet, as if it had been raining heavily. "Yes, that it has," said she. And then, just as she was going to tell him a great many pretty stories from Holberg's comedies, and about Waldemar and Absalom, she suddenly shrunk up together and wagged her head as if she were a frog about to spring. "Croak," she cried. "It is always wet, and as quiet as death in Sorøy." Then Little Tuk saw she was changed into a frog. Croak, and again she was an old woman. "One must dress according to the weather," said she. "It is wet, and my town is just like a bottle. By the cork we must go in, and by the cork we must come out again. In olden times I had beautiful fish, and now I have fresh, rosy-cheeked boys in the bottom of the bottle, and they learn wisdom, Hebrew and Greek." Croak. How it sounded like the cry of the frogs on the moor, or like the creaking of great boots when someone is marching. Always the same tone, so monotonous and wearing, that Little Tuk at length fell fast asleep, and then the sound could not annoy him. But even in this sleep came a dream or something like it. His little sister Gustava, with her blue eyes and fair curly hair, had grown up a beautiful maiden all at once, and without having wings she could fly. And they flew together over Zealand, over green forests and blue lakes. "Hark, so you hear the cock crow, Little Tuk. Cock-a-doodle-doo." The fowls are flying out of Kyoga. You shall have a large farmyard. You shall never suffer hunger or want. The bird of good omen shall be yours, and you shall become a rich and happy man. Your house shall rise up like King Waldemar's towers, and shall be richly adorned with marble statues, like those at Prasto. Understand me well. Your name shall travel with fame round the world like the ship that was to sail from Corsor. And at Roskilde, don't forget the names of the towns, as King Hroar said. You shall speak well and clearly Little Tuk, and when at last you lie in your grave, you shall sleep peacefully, as if I lay in Soroi, said Little Tuk, awaking. It was bright daylight, and he could not remember his dream, but that was not necessary, for we are not to know what will happen to us in the future. Then he sprang out of bed quickly and read over his lesson in the book, and knew it all at once quite correctly. The old washerwoman put her head in at the door and nodded to him quite kindly and said, "Many thanks, you good child, for your help yesterday. I hope all your beautiful dreams will come true." Little Tuk did not at all know what he had dreamt, but one above did. The candles. Once upon a time, in a grand old house filled with polished furniture and heavy velvet curtains, there stood a big wax candle. It was tall and stately, molded in perfect symmetry, and it believed there was no finer candle in all the world. "I," said the wax candle proudly, "am made of the purest wax, cast in the finest mold. My flame burns clear and steady, brighter than any tallow or taper ever dreamed. I am meant for splendid rooms, for glittering chandeliers, for noble gatherings where people dress in silk and talk of art and music. That is the world I belong to." A small tallow candle stood nearby on the kitchen shelf. It was humbler in shape and a bit uneven along its sides, but it listened politely and smiled. "What a delightful life you must have," said the tallow candle. "I am only made of tallow, plain and simple, just a kitchen dip. But still, I was dipped 8 times to make me thick and strong. The little tapers are dipped only twice, and they burn out before the hour is gone. I'm grateful for what I am. Of course," it added, "it would be fine to be born of wax and molded so handsomely. But one cannot choose his birth, can he? You shine in parlors, I serve in kitchens. Yet the kitchen is not such a poor place either. All the food that keeps the household alive comes from there." The wax candle gave a lofty flicker. "Food," he said disdainfully. "There are more refined things than food. I belong to high company, where there is laughter, music, and the glitter of silver and glass. Indeed, tonight I shall shine at a grand ball. All my family have been invited. We will make the chandeliers blaze like a crown of stars." Even as he spoke, the maid came to fetch all the wax candles from the drawer. Off they went in a polished tray, tall and gleaming, proud to fulfill their noble purpose. But the tallow candle was not left forgotten. The mistress of the house entered the kitchen with her little daughter beside her. She saw a poor boy waiting by the door, holding a basket of potatoes and a few apples she had given him. "And here's a candle for you too, my little friend," said the lady kindly. "Your mother can use it when she works late at night." At those words, the little daughter clapped her hands. "We're staying up late tonight too, Mama," she cried. "There's to be a ball, and I shall wear my big red ribbon." Her eyes sparkled with joy, brighter than any flame. The tallow candle thought, "No light in the world could shine as beautifully as a happy child's face. Soon the candle found itself in the basket among the potatoes, with the lid shut tight. Where can he be taking me? It wondered. No doubt to a poor home, where there is not even a brass candlestick for me to stand in, while the wax candles sit in silver and see the fine people dance. I shall burn in some dark room. But this is the fate of tallow. We are born to serve the humble. He was right. The boy carried the basket to a low, small dwelling across the street from the grand house. Inside lived a widow and her 3 little children. The room was low-ceilinged and poor, but neat and clean. When the widow saw the candle, she said, "God bless our kind neighbor. This good light will help me work far into the night." She struck a match and lit the candle. "Phut, fie," it sputtered. What a dreadful smell, the candle thought. Would they dare use such a match for the wax candle over there in the great house? Yet, at that very moment, the wax candles were being lit too. The chandeliers blazed, carriages rolled to the door, and music filled the street. The tallow candle could almost hear the violins. "Now the ball begins," it murmured sadly. But then he remembered the bright-eyed little girl with her red ribbon, and smiled through his own flame. "Perhaps," he thought, "I shall see such joy again." The smallest of the poor children clambered up on a chair and put her little arms around her brother and sister. "Guess what?" she whispered. "Tonight we're going to have warm potatoes." Her eyes shone with excitement. The candle beamed back at her with a soft glow, as if sharing her happiness. It thought, maybe joy does not depend on chandeliers after all. The table was spread, and the family ate. Oh, how good the simple food tasted. There was even an apple for each child. The youngest folded her hands and said her prayer. "Now thanks, dear Lord, I give to thee, that thou again hast filled me. Amen." Then she looked up and asked, "Didn't I say it nicely, Mother?" "Hush, my child," the mother said gently. "Just thank the Lord from your heart." After supper, the children were kissed and tucked into bed. The mother stayed awake, sewing by the candle's light to earn their bread for another day. Across the street, the wax candles burned in splendor above the dancing guests. But outside, the same quiet stars looked down on both houses, the rich and the poor, with equal kindness. This has been a good evening, thought the tallow candle. Perhaps the wax candle shines brighter, but can he have seen anything lovelier than this? He remembered the 2 little girls, one with her red ribbon, one whispering over warm potatoes. Their faces, so full of innocent joy, were alike in happiness, and as the tallow candle burned lower, he shed gentle drops of melted tallow like tears, tears of contentment. Yes, he thought as his flame waned, light is light, whether it glitters in silver or glows in humble clay, and happiness, wherever it appears, shines with the same holy brightness. The bell deep, ding-dong, ding-dong, echoes faintly from the mysterious depths of the Odense River. But what sort of river is this? Why, every child born in the town of Odense knows it as well as their own street. It winds gently through the heart of the town, slipping past the foot of gardens, gliding under the old wooden bridges, and whispering secrets to the reeds and lilies along its banks. The yellow water lilies float like little suns upon its surface, while brown, feather-like reeds nod their slender heads to the current, and higher still, black, velvety bulrushes rise in proud clusters, so tall and dense that even the midday light can hardly break through. Old willows lean over the water, their roots clutching the muddy banks like tired fingers. Their trunks are hollow, bent and twisted, with silver bark peeling away in places. They stand as if weary with age, drooping sadly above the slow water near the monk's marsh and the pale, mist-covered meadows. Yet not far above that lonely stretch, the gardens begin, each one with its own soul, its own story. Some bloom in perfect order, with straight little paths and clean, painted arbors, so neat they might have been made for dolls. Others are wilder, filled with tangles of cabbages and herbs, their fences leaning, their soil fragrant with the honest scent of earth. And still others have given themselves entirely to nature's hand, where old elder trees spread thick branches out over the flowing river, shading it until the water runs dark and still. In places it is so deep that even an oar cannot find the bottom, but the very deepest point lies directly across from what once was the old nunnery. That shadowed hollow is known as the Bell Deep, and there, so the elders tell us, dwells the ancient merman. By day, he sleeps in the green gloom, where sunlight filters through the ripples in trembling ribbons of gold. But on quiet nights, when stars are sharp and the moon is high, he rises from his watery chamber and listens to the world above. He is very old, older, grandmother says, than any living man could remember. Her own grandmother had spoken of him when she was a little girl. He lives there still, lonely and silent, with only one companion, the great bell that once hung in the steeple of St. Albans Church. Once, long ago, that bell had rung bright and proud. Ding-dong, ding-dong, it sang over the rooftops, calling the townsfolk to prayer, proclaiming weddings and deaths, christenings and festivals. But one red evening, when the sun sank low and the whole river glowed like molten gold, the bell broke free from its wooden beam. As it fell, the crimson light glimmered on its bronze surface, and it seemed almost alive, almost joyous. Ding-dong, ding-dong, now I go to my rest, it cried as it plunged into the deepest part of the Odense River. That is how the place came to be called the Bell Deep. Yet the bell found no peace there. It neither slept nor rusted away. Even now, on still nights, one can hear it faintly through the dark waters, a trembling sound like a sigh from another world. Many people whisper that it tolls to foretell the death of someone in the town. But no, that is not its purpose. It rings to speak with the merman, for he is lonely, and the bell is his only friend beneath the river. And what stories the bell tells! For it is ancient, cast long before grandmother's grandmother was born, though even it is but a child beside the merman. The merman himself is a curious figure, quiet, solemn, and strange. His trousers are made from the sleek skins of eels, his coat from glimmering fish scales decorated with yellow water lilies. Brown bulrushes sprout from his hair, and little duckweeds cling to his long beard. He is not beautiful, no, but there is something noble in his sadness, something as deep and secret as the river itself. When the bell speaks, its tales roll out in long, slow echoes, swelling and softening like the tide. It remembers everything, the times of joy and sorrow, the triumphs and cruelties of mankind. Sometimes it grows weary of repetition and shortens the story. At other times it grows passionate and tells it with the power of a storm. Always it begins the same way. Ding-dong, ding-dong. Once it tells of a young monk who climbed the tower of St. Albans. He was handsome, but troubled, with eyes dark as thought itself. He leaned at the narrow window, gazing out over the broad river. In those days, the marshes were still a great lake, glimmering like glass. Across the water rose a green rampart called the Nun's Hill, and beyond that stood the quiet cloister. From one high window burned a single light, the lamp of a nun he had once known. His heart trembled as he saw it. Ding dong, sighed the bell, remembering. Another time, it tells of a foolish servant of the bishop who climbed the tower to play beneath it. The great bell swung above his head, and when it rang, the air shuddered. He sat right beneath it, tapping two sticks together as if he played a secret tune. He sang softly. Here I may dare to sing what elsewhere I dare not whisper. There are secrets behind locks and bolts, where the air is damp and the rats devour the living. No one sees, no one hears, except the bell that cries above. Ding dong, and the bell remembers the story of King Knud, the pious one who bowed before bishops but turned cruel to his people. He demanded too much, and the folk of Vendelbo rose against him with weapons and wild fury. He fled to St. Albans and barred the doors. The mob surrounded the church. Even the crows and ravens were frightened and circled the steeple, crying to one another. Inside, the king prayed before the altar, guarded by his brothers, Eric and Benedict. But treachery found its way in. His servant Blake betrayed him, and through the window came a stone that struck the king dead where he knelt. The birds shrieked, the mob roared, and the bell rang out in anguish. Ding dong, ding dong. The bell had seen so much from its high place: storms and weddings, deaths and festivals, sins and prayers. The birds came to rest upon its rim and told it their secrets. The wind whispered to it through the tower slits. The wind, you see, knows all things. It moves among all living creatures. It fills our lungs, hears our words and sighs, and carries them through the sky. And when the bell heard these things, it too repeated them, pealing them out for the world to hear. Ding dong, but in time, the weight of all it had heard grew too great to bear. The sorrow of mankind, the cries of the dead, the songs of the lost, all pressed upon its bronze heart until the wooden beam cracked beneath it. And so the bell fell, flaming in the sunset, down into the depths of the Odense River, where it lies to this day beside the lonely merman. And there, through the endless years, it still murmurs its stories to him, of what it saw, of what it knew. Ding dong, that is what grandmother says, and she heard it from her grandmother before her. But our schoolmaster insists there is no bell down there at all. He says there are no mermen either, that such tales belong to the dreams of children. When the bells ring, he says, it is not metal, but air that makes the sound. For the air carries all things. Yet, grandmother agrees with him on that point, for the bell itself once told her the same truth. The air knows all. It surrounds us, breathes within us, carries our thoughts and deeds to the heavens. It whispers them farther than any bell could reach, beyond the river, beyond the stars, until at last, in the farthest vault of heaven, the great celestial bells take up the sound. Ding dong, forever and ever. The Elfin Hill. A few large lizards were running nimbly about in the clefts of an old tree. They could understand one another very well, for they spoke the lizard language. What a buzzing and a rumbling there is in the Elfin Hill, said one of the lizards. I have not been able to close my eyes for 2 nights on account of the noise. I might just as well have had the toothache, for that always keeps me awake." "There is something going on within there," said the other lizard. "They propped up the top of the hill with 4 red posts till cock-crow this morning, so that it is thoroughly aired, and the elfin girls have learnt new dances. There is something." "I spoke about it to an earthworm of my acquaintance," said a third lizard. The earthworm had just come from the Elfin Hill, where he has been groping about in the earth day and night. He has heard a great deal, although he cannot see, poor miserable creature, yet he understands very well how to wriggle and lurk about. They expect friends in the Elfin Hill, grand company too, but who they are the earthworm would not say. Or perhaps he really did not know. All the will-o'-the-wisps are ordered to be there to hold a torch dance, as it is called. The silver and gold which is plentiful in the hill will be polished and placed out in the moonlight. "Who can the strangers be?" asked the lizards. "What can the matter be? Hark, what a buzzing and humming there is!" Just at this moment the Elfin Hill opened, and an old elfin maiden, hollow behind, came tripping out. She was the old elf king's housekeeper, and a distant relative of the family. Therefore she wore an amber heart on the middle of her forehead. Her feet moved very fast. Trip, trip. Good gracious, how she could trip right down to the sea to the night raven. "You are invited to the Elf Hill for this evening," said she. "But will you do me a great favor and undertake the invitations? You ought to do something, for you have no housekeeping to attend to as I have. We are going to have some very grand people, conjurers, who have always something to say, and therefore the old elf king wishes to make a great display." "Who is to be invited?" asked the raven. "All the world may come to the great ball, even human beings, if they can only talk in their sleep, or do something after our fashion. But for the feast, the company must be carefully selected. We can only admit persons of high rank. I have had a dispute myself with the Elf King, as he thought we could not admit ghosts. The merman and his daughter must be invited first, although it may not be agreeable to them to remain so long on dry land, but they shall have a wet stone to sit on, or perhaps something better. So I think they will not refuse this time. We must have all the old demons of the first class, with tails, and the hobgoblins and imps. And then I think we ought not to leave out the death horse, or the grave pig, or even the church dwarf, although they do belong to the clergy and are not reckoned among our people. But that is merely their office. They are nearly related to us and visit us very frequently." "Croak," said the night raven as he flew away with the invitations. The elfin maidens were already dancing on the Elf Hill, and they danced in shawls woven from moonshine and mist, which look very pretty to those who like such things. The large hall within the Elf Hill was splendidly decorated. The floor had been washed with moonshine, and the walls had been rubbed with magic ointment, so that they glowed like tulip leaves in the light. In the kitchen were frogs roasting on the spit, and dishes preparing of snail skins, with children's fingers in them, salad of mushroom seed, hemlock, noses and marrow of mice, beer from the marsh woman's brewery, and sparkling saltpeter wine from the grave cellars. These were all substantial food. Rusty nails and church window glass formed the dessert. The old elf king had his gold crown polished up with powdered slate pencil. It was like that used by the first form, and very difficult for an elf king to obtain. In the bedrooms, curtains were hung up and fastened with the slime of snails. There was, indeed, a buzzing and humming everywhere. Now we must fumigate the place with burnt horsehair and pig's bristles, and then I think I shall have done my part, said the elf-man's servant. Father dear, said the youngest daughter, may I now hear who our high-born visitors are? Well, I suppose I must tell you now, he replied. 2 of my daughters must prepare themselves to be married, for the marriages certainly will take place. The old goblin from Norway, who lives in the ancient Dovre mountains, and who possesses many castles built of rock and free stone, besides a gold mine, which is better than all, so it is thought, is coming with his 2 sons, who are both seeking a wife. The old goblin is a true-hearted, honest, old Norwegian graybeard, cheerful and straightforward. I knew him formerly, when we used to drink together to our good fellowship. He came here once to fetch his wife. She is dead now. She was the daughter of the king of the Chalk Hills at Moen. They say he took his wife from Chalk. I shall be delighted to see him again. It is said that the boys are ill-bred, forward lads, but perhaps that is not quite correct, and they will become better as they grow older. Let me see that you know how to teach them good manners. And when are they coming? Asked the daughter. That depends upon wind and weather, said the Elf King. They travel economically. They will come when there is the chance of a ship. I wanted them to come over to Sweden, but the old man was not inclined to take my advice. He does not go forward with the times, and that I do not like. 2 will-o'-the-wisps came jumping in, one quicker than the other, so of course one arrived first. They are coming, he cried. Give me my crown, said the Elf King, and let me stand in the moonshine. The daughters drew on their shawls and bowed down to the ground. There stood the old goblin from the Dovre mountains, with his crown of hardened ice and polished fir cones. Besides this, he wore a bearskin and great warm boots, while his sons went with their throats bare and wore no braces, for they were strong men. Is that a hill? Said the youngest of the boys, pointing to the Elf Hill. We should call it a hole in Norway. Boys, said the old man, a hole goes in, and a hill stands out. Have you no eyes in your heads? Another thing they wondered at was that they were able without trouble to understand the language. Take care, said the old man, or people will think you have not been well brought up. Dal? Then they entered the Elfin Hill, where the select and grand company were assembled, and so quickly had they appeared that they seemed to have been blown together. But for each guest, the neatest and pleasantest arrangement had been made. The sea folks sat at table in great water tubs, and they said it was just like being at home. All behaved themselves properly, excepting the 2 young northern goblins. They put their legs on the table and thought they were all right. Feet off the tablecloth, said the old goblin. They obeyed, but not immediately. Then they tickled the ladies who waited at table with the fir cones which they carried in their pockets. They took off their boots, that they might be more at ease, and gave them to the ladies to hold. But their father, the old goblin, was very different. He talked pleasantly about the stately Norwegian rocks, and told fine tales of the waterfalls which dashed over them with a clattering noise like thunder or the sound of an organ, spreading their white foam on every side. He told of the salmon that leaps in the rushing waters, while the water god plays on his golden harp. He spoke of the bright winter nights, when the sledge bells are ringing, and the boys run with burning torches across the smooth ice, which is so transparent that they can see the fishes dart forward beneath their feet. He described everything so clearly that those who listened could see it all. They could see the sawmills going, the men servants and the maidens singing songs and dancing a rattling dance. When all at once the old goblin gave the old elfin maiden a kiss, such a tremendous kiss, and yet they were almost strangers to each other. Then the elfin girls had to dance, first in the usual way, and then with stamping feet, which they performed very well. Then followed the artistic and solo dance. Dear me, how they did throw their legs about! No one could tell where the dance begun or where it ended, nor indeed which were legs and which were arms, for they were all flying about together, like the shavings in a saw-pit. And then they spun round so quickly that the death horse and the grave pig became sick and giddy, and were obliged to leave the table. "Stop!" cried the old goblin. "Is that the only housekeeping they can perform? Can they do anything more than dance and throw about their legs and make a whirlwind?" "You shall soon see what they can do," said the Elf King. And then he called his youngest daughter to him. She was slender and fair as moonlight, and the most graceful of all the sisters. She took a white chip in her mouth and vanished instantly. This was her accomplishment. But the old goblin said he should not like his wife to have such an accomplishment, and thought his boys would have the same objection. Another daughter could make a figure like herself follow her, as if she had a shadow, which none of the goblin folk ever had. The third was of quite a different sort. She had learnt in the brewhouse of the Moor Witch how to lard elfin puddings with glowworms. "She will make a good housewife," said the old goblin, and then saluted her with his eyes instead of drinking her health, for he did not drink much. Now came the fourth daughter, with a large harp to play upon, and when she struck the first chord, everyone lifted up the left leg, for the goblins are left-legged, and at the second chord they found they must all do just what she wanted. "That is a dangerous woman," said the old goblin, and the two sons walked out of the hill. They had had enough of it. "And what can the next daughter do?" asked the old goblin. "I have learnt everything that is Norwegian," said she, "and I will never marry unless I can go to Norway." Then her youngest sister whispered to the old goblin, "That is only because she has heard, in a Norwegian song, that when the world shall decay, the cliffs of Norway will remain standing like monuments, and she wants to get there that she may be safe, for she is so afraid of sinking." "Ho, ho," said the old goblin. "Is that what she means? Well, what can the seventh and last do?" "The sixth comes before the seventh," said the Elf King, for he could reckon, "but the sixth would not come forward." "I can only tell people the truth," said she. "No one cares for me, nor troubles himself about me, and I have enough to do to sew my grave clothes." So the seventh and last came, and what could she do? Why, she could tell stories as many as you liked on any subject. "Here are my 5 fingers," said the old goblin. "Now tell me a story for each of them." So she took him by the wrist, and he laughed till he nearly choked, and when she came to the 4th finger, there was a gold ring on it, as if it knew there was to be a betrothal. Then the old goblin said, "Hold fast what you have. This hand is yours, for I will have you for a wife myself." Then the elfin girl said that the stories about the ring finger and little Peter Playman had not yet been told. "We will hear them in the winter," said the old goblin, "and also about the fir and the birch trees, and the ghost stories, and of the tingling frost. You shall tell your tales, for no one over there can do it so well. And we will sit in the stone rooms, where the pine logs are burning, and drink mead out of the golden drinking horn of the old Norwegian kings. The water god has given me two, and when we sit there, Nyx comes to pay us a visit, and will sing you all the songs of the mountain shepherdesses. How merry we shall be! The salmon will be leaping in the waterfalls and dashing against the stone walls, but he will not be able to come in. It is indeed very pleasant to live in old Norway. But where are the lads? Where indeed were they? Why, running about the fields and blowing out the will-o'-the-wisps, who so good-naturedly came and brought their torches. "What tricks have you been playing?" said the old goblin. "I have taken a mother for you, and now you may take one of your aunts." But the youngsters said they would rather make a speech and drink to their good fellowship. They had no wish to marry. Then they made speeches and drank toasts and tipped their glasses to show that they were empty. Then they took off their coats and lay down on the table to sleep, for they made themselves quite at home. But the old goblin danced about the room with his young bride and exchanged boots with her, which is more fashionable than exchanging rings. "The cock is crowing," said the old elfin maiden who acted as housekeeper. "Now we must close the shutters, that the sun may not scorch us." Then the hill closed up, but the lizards continued to run up and down the riven tree, and one said to the other, "Oh, how much I was pleased with the old goblin!" "The boys pleased me better," said the earthworm. But then the poor, miserable creature could not see. The story of the year. It was near the end of January, and a terrible fall of snow was pelting down and whirling through the streets and lanes. The windows were plastered with snow on the outside. Snow fell in masses from the roofs. Everyone seemed in a great hurry. They ran, they flew, fell into each other's arms, holding fast for a moment as long as they could stand safely. Coaches and horses looked as if they had been frosted with sugar. The footmen stood with their backs against the carriages so as to turn their faces from the wind. The foot passengers kept within the shelter of the carriages, which could only move slowly on in the deep snow. At last, the storm abated, and a narrow path was swept clean in front of the houses. When two persons met in this path, they stood still, for neither liked to take the first step on one side into the deep snow to let the other pass him. There they stood silent and motionless, till at last, as if by tacit consent, they each sacrificed a leg and buried it in the deep snow. Towards evening, the weather became calm. The sky, cleared from the snow, looked more lofty and transparent, while the stars shone with new brightness and purity. The frozen snow crackled underfoot and was quite firm enough to bear the sparrows, who hopped upon it in the morning dawn. They searched for food in the path which had been swept, but there was very little for them, and they were terribly cold. "Tweet, tweet," said one to another. "They call this a new year, but I think it is worse than the last. We might just as well have kept the old year. I'm quite unhappy, and I have a right to be so." "Yes, you have, and yet the people ran about and fired off guns to usher in the new year," said a little shivering sparrow. "They threw things against the doors and were quite beside themselves with joy, because the old year had disappeared. I was glad too, for I expected we should have some warm days, but my hopes have come to nothing. It freezes harder than ever. I think mankind have made a mistake in reckoning time." "That they have," said a third, an old sparrow with a white poll. "They have something they call a calendar. It's an invention of their own, and everything must be arranged according to it. But it won't do. When spring comes, then the year begins. It is the voice of nature, and I reckon by that. But when will spring come? Asked the others. It will come when the stork returns, but he is very uncertain, and here in the town no one knows anything about it. In the country they have more knowledge. Shall we fly away there and wait? We shall be nearer to spring then, certainly. That may be all very well, said another sparrow, who had been hopping about for a long time, chirping, but not saying anything of consequence. But I have found a few comforts here in town which, I'm afraid, I should miss out in the country. Here in this neighborhood, there lives a family of people who have been so sensible as to place 3 or 4 flower pots against the wall in the courtyard, so that the openings are all turned inward, and the bottom of each points outward. In the latter, a hole has been cut large enough for me to fly in and out. I and my husband have built a nest in one of these pots, and all our young ones, who have now flown away, were brought up there. The people who live there, of course, made the whole arrangement that they might have the pleasure of seeing us, or they would not have done it. It pleased them also to strew breadcrumbs for us, and so we have food and may consider ourselves provided for. So I think my husband and I will stay where we are, although we are not very happy, but we shall stay. And we will fly into the country, said the others, to see if spring is coming. And away they flew. In the country it was really winter, a few degrees colder than in the town. The sharp winds blew over the snow-covered fields. The farmer, wrapped in warm clothing, sat in his sleigh and beat his arms across his chest to keep off the cold. The whip lay on his lap. The horses ran till they smoked. The snow crackled. The sparrows hopped about in the wheel ruts and shivered, crying, "Tweet, tweet, when will spring come? It is very long in coming." Very long indeed, sounded over the field from the nearest snow-covered hill. It might have been the echo which people heard, or perhaps the words of that wonderful old man who sat high on a heap of snow, regardless of wind or weather. He was all in white. He had on a peasant's coarse white coat of frieze. He had long white hair, a pale face, and large, clear blue eyes. "Who is that old man?" asked the sparrows. "I know who he is," said an old raven who sat on the fence and was condescending enough to acknowledge that we are all equal in the sight of heaven, even as little birds, and therefore he talked with the sparrows and gave them the information they wanted. "I know who the old man is," he said. "It is Winter, the old man of last year. He is not dead yet, as the calendar says, but acts as guardian to little Prince Spring, who is coming. Winter rules here still. Ugh, the cold makes you shiver, little ones, does it not?" "There, did I not tell you so?" said the smallest of the sparrows. "The calendar is only an invention of man, and is not arranged according to nature. They should leave these things to us. We are created so much more clever than they are." 1 week passed, and then another. The forest looked dark. The hard frozen lake lay like a sheet of lead. The mountains had disappeared, for over the land hung damp, icy mists. Large black crows flew about in silence. It was as if nature slept. At length a sunbeam glided over the lake, and it shone like burnished silver. But the snow on the fields and the hills did not glitter as before. The white form of Winter sat there still, with his unwandering gaze fixed on the south. He did not perceive that the snowy carpet seemed to sink, as it were, into the earth. that here and there a little green patch of grass appeared, and that these patches were covered with sparrows. "Tee-wit, tee-wit, is spring coming at last?" Spring. How the cry resounded over field and meadow, and through the dark brown woods, where the fresh green moss still gleamed on the trunks of the trees, and from the south came the two first storks flying through the air, and on the back of each sat a lovely little child, a boy and a girl. They greeted the earth with a kiss, and wherever they placed their feet, white flowers sprung up from beneath the snow. Hand in hand they approached the old iceman. Winter embraced him and clung to his breast, and as they did so, in a moment all three were enveloped in a thick, damp mist, dark and heavy, that closed over them like a veil. The wind arose with mighty, rustling tone and cleared away the mist. Then the sun shone out warmly. Winter had vanished away, and the beautiful children of spring sat on the throne of the year. "This is really a new year," cried all the sparrows. "Now we shall get our rights, and have some return for what we suffered in winter." Wherever the two children wandered, green buds burst forth on bush and tree, the grass grew higher, and the cornfields became lovely in delicate green. The little maiden strewed flowers in her path. She held her apron before her. It was full of flowers. It was as if they sprung into life there. For the more she scattered around her, the more flowers did her apron contain. Eagerly she showered snowy blossoms over apple and peach trees, so that they stood in full beauty, before even their green leaves had burst from the bud. Then the boy and the girl clapped their hands, and troops of birds came flying by. No one knew from whence, and they all twittered and chirped, singing, "Spring has come." How beautiful everything was! Many an old dame came forth from her door into the sunshine and shuffled about with great delight, glancing at the golden flowers which glittered everywhere in the fields, as they used to do in her young days. The world grew young again to her, as she said, "It is a blessed time out here today." The forest already wore its dress of dark green buds. The thyme blossomed in fresh fragrance. Primroses and anemones sprung forth, and violets bloomed in the shade, while every blade of grass was full of strength and sap. Who could resist sitting down on such a beautiful carpet? And then the young children of spring seated themselves, holding each other's hands, and sang and laughed and grew. A gentle rain fell upon them from the sky, but they did not notice it, for the raindrops were their own tears of joy. They kissed each other and were betrothed, and in the same moment the buds of the trees unfolded, and when the sun rose, the forest was green. Hand in hand, the two wandered beneath the fresh pendant canopy of foliage, while the sun's rays gleamed through the opening of the shade in changing and varied colors. The delicate young leaves filled the air with refreshing odor. Merrily rippled the clear brooks and rivulets between the green, velvety rushes and over the many-colored pebbles beneath. All nature spoke of abundance and plenty. The cuckoo sang, and the lark caroled, for it was now beautiful spring. The careful willows had, however, covered their blossoms with woolly gloves. And this carefulness is rather tedious. Days and weeks went by, and the heat increased. Warm air waved the corn as it grew golden in the sun. The white northern lily spread its large green leaves over the glossy mirror of the woodland lake, and the fishes sought the shadows beneath them. In a sheltered part of the wood, the sun shone upon the walls of a farmhouse, brightening the blooming roses and ripening the black, juicy berries, which hung on the loaded cherry trees with his hot beams. Here sat the lovely wife of summer, the same whom we have seen as a child and a bride. Her eyes were fixed on dark gathering clouds, which in wavy outlines of black and indigo were piling themselves up like mountains, higher and higher. They came from every side, always increasing like a rising, rolling sea. Then they swooped towards the forest, where every sound had been silenced as if by magic, every breath hushed, every bird mute. All nature stood still in grave suspense, but in the lanes and the highways, passengers on foot or in carriages were hurrying to find a place of shelter. Then came a flash of light, as if the sun had rushed forth from the sky, flaming, burning, all devouring, and darkness returned amid a rolling crash of thunder. The rain poured down in streams. Now there was darkness, then blinding light, now thrilling silence, then deafening din. The young brown reeds on the moor waved to and fro in feathery billows. The forest boughs were hidden in a watery mist, and still light and darkness followed each other. Still came the silence after the roar, while the corn and the blades of grass lay beaten down and swamped so that it seemed impossible they could ever raise themselves again. But after a while, the rain began to fall gently. The sun's rays pierced the clouds, and the water drops glittered like pearls on leaf and stem. The birds sang, the fishes leaped up to the surface of the water, the gnats danced in the sunshine. And yonder, on a rock by the heaving salt sea, sat Summer himself, a strong man with sturdy limbs and long, dripping hair. Strengthened by the cool bath, he sat in the warm sunshine, while all around him renewed. Nature bloomed strong, luxuriant, and beautiful. It was summer, warm, lovely summer. Sweet and pleasant was the fragrance wafted from the clover field, where the bees swarmed round the ruined tower. The bramble twined itself over the old altar, which, washed by the rain, glittered in the sunshine. And thither flew the queen bee with her swarm, and prepared wax and honey. But Summer and his bosom wife saw it with different eyes. To them the altar table was covered with the offerings of nature. The evening sky shone like gold. No church dome could ever gleam so brightly. And between the golden evening and the blushing morning there was moonlight. It was indeed summer, and days and weeks passed. The bright scythes of the reapers glittered in the cornfields. The branches of the apple trees bent low, heavy with the red and golden fruit. The hop, hanging in clusters, filled the air with sweet fragrance, and beneath the hazel bushes, where the nuts hung in great bunches, rested a man and a woman, Summer and his grave consort. "See," she exclaimed, "what wealth, what blessings surround us. Everything is homelike and good, and yet I know not why. I long for rest and peace. I can scarcely express what I feel. They are already plowing the fields again. More and more the people wish for gain. See, the storks are flocking together and following the plow at a short distance. They are the birds from Egypt who carried us through the air. Do you remember how we came as children to this land of the north? We brought with us flowers and bright sunshine and green to the forests. But the wind has been rough with them, and they are now become dark and brown like the trees of the south. But they do not, like them, bear golden fruit. Do you wish to see golden fruit? Said the man. Then rejoice. And he lifted his arm. The leaves of the forest put on colors of red and gold, and bright tints covered the woodlands. The rose bushes gleamed with scarlet hips, and the branches of the elder trees hung down with the weight of the full, dark berries. The wild chestnuts fell ripe from their dark green shells, and in the forests the violets bloomed for the second time. But the queen of the year became more and more silent and pale. "It blows cold," she said, "and night brings the damp mist. I long for the land of my childhood." Bah, then she saw the storks fly away, every one, and she stretched out her hands towards them. She looked at the empty nests. In one of them grew a long, stalked cornflower, in another the yellow mustard seed, as if the nest had been placed there only for its comfort and protection, and the sparrows were flying round them all. "Tweet, where has the master of the nest gone?" cried one. "I suppose he could not bear it when the wind blew, and therefore he has left this country. I wish him a pleasant journey." The forest leaves became more and more yellow. Leaf after leaf fell, and the stormy winds of autumn howled. The year was now far advanced, and upon the fallen yellow leaves lay the queen of the year, looking up with mild eyes at a gleaming star, and her husband stood by her. A gust of wind swept through the foliage, and the leaves fell in a shower. The summer queen was gone, but a butterfly, the last of the year, flew through the cold air. Damp fogs came, icy winds blew, and the long, dark nights of winter approached. The ruler of the year appeared with hair white as snow, but he knew it not. He thought snowflakes falling from the sky covered his head as they decked the green fields with a thin, white covering of snow. And then the church bells rang out for Christmas time. "The bells are ringing for the newborn year," said the ruler. "Soon will a new ruler and his bride be born, and I shall go to rest with my wife in yonder light-giving star." In the fresh, green fir-wood, where the snow lay all around, stood the angel of Christmas, and consecrated the young trees that were to adorn his feast. "May there be joy in the rooms and under the green boughs," said the old ruler of the year. In a few weeks he had become a very old man, with hair as white as snow. "My resting time draws near. The young pair of the year will soon claim my crown and scepter." "In, but the night is still thine," said the angel of Christmas, "for power, but not for rest. Let the snow lie warmly upon the tender seed. Learn to endure the thought that another is worshipped whilst thou art still Lord. Learn to endure being forgotten while yet thou livest. The hour of thy freedom will come when spring appears." "And when will spring come?" asked Winter. "It will come when the stork returns. And with white locks and snowy beard, cold, bent, and hoary, but strong as the wintry storm, and firm as the ice. Old Winter sat on the snow-drift-covered hill, looking towards the south, where Winter had sat before, and gazed. The ice glittered, the snow crackled, the skaters skimmed over the polished surface of the lakes. Ravens and crows formed a pleasing contrast to the white ground, and not a breath of wind stirred. And in the still air old Winter clenched his fists, and the ice lay fathoms deep between the lands. Then came the sparrows again out of the town, and asked, "Who is that old man?" The raven sat there still, or it might be his son, which is the same thing. And he said to them, "It is Winter, the old man of the former year. He is not dead, as the calendar says, but he is guardian to the spring, which is coming." "When will spring come?" asked the sparrows. "For we shall have better times then, and a better rule. The old times are worth nothing." And in quiet thought old Winter looked at the leafless forest, where the graceful form and bends of each tree and branch could be seen. And while winter slept, icy mists came from the clouds, and the ruler dreamt of his youthful days and of his manhood. And in the morning dawn, the whole forest glittered with hoar frost, which the sun shook from the branches. And this was the summer dream of winter. "When will spring come?" asked the sparrows. "Spring, by." Again the echo sounded from the hills on which the snow lay. The sunshine became warmer, the snow melted, and the birds twittered, "Spring is coming!" And high in the air flew the first stork, and the second followed. A lovely child sat on the back of each, and they sank down on the open field, kissed the earth, and kissed the quiet old man. And, as the mist from the mountain top, he vanished away and disappeared. And the story of the year was finished. "This is all very fine, no doubt," said the sparrows, "and it is very beautiful, but it is not according to the calendar. Therefore, it must be all wrong." In the duckyard, a duck arrived from Portugal. Some people said she came from Spain, but that doesn't really matter. She was called the Portuguese. She laid eggs and was killed and dressed and cooked. That's the story of her life. But all the ducklings that were hatched from her eggs were also called Portuguese, and there's some distinction in that. At last, there was only one left of her whole family in the duckyard, a yard to which the hens also had access, and where the cock strutted about with endless arrogance. "His loud crowing annoys me," said the Portuguese duck, "but there's no denying he's a handsome bird, even if he isn't a drake. Of course, he should moderate his voice, but that's an art that comes from higher education, such as the little songbirds over in our neighbors' lime trees have. How sweetly they sing. There's something so touching over their melodies. I call it Portugal. If I only had a little songbird like that, I'd be a kind and good mother to him, for that's in my blood, my Portuguese blood." While she was speaking, suddenly a little songbird fell head over heels from the roof into the yard. The cat had been chasing him, but the bird escaped with a broken wing and fell down into the duck yard. "That's just like the cat, that monster," said the Portuguese duck. "I remember his tricks from when I had ducklings of my own. That such a creature should be permitted to live and roam about on the roofs. I'm sure such things could not happen in Portugal." She pitied the little songbird, and even the other ducks who weren't Portuguese felt pity for him too. "Poor little fellow," they said, and then one after another came up to look at him. "Of course, we can't sing," they said, "but we have an inner understanding of song, or something like that. We can feel it, even if we don't talk about it." "Then I will talk about it," said the Portuguese, "and I'll do something for this little fellow. It's only my duty." And then she stepped into the water trough and thrashed her wings about the water so vigorously that the little songbird was almost drowned by the shower he got. But he knew the duck meant well. "There, that's a good deed," she said. "The others may observe it and profit by my example." "Peep," said the little bird. One of his wings was broken, and he was finding it difficult to shake himself. But he quite understood that the bath was meant kindly. "You're very kind-hearted, madam," he said, hoping she wouldn't give him another shower. "I never thought much about my heart," said the Portuguese, "but I know this much. I love all my fellow creatures except the cat. Nobody could expect me to love him, for he ate up 2 of my ducklings. Now make yourself at home, for you can be quite comfortable here. I myself am a foreigner, as you can tell from my bearing and my feathered dress. My drake is a native of this country. He doesn't have my blood, but still I'm not proud. If anyone in this yard can understand you, I may safely say it is I. Her beak is full of portulaca, said a common little duck, who was considered very witty. All the other common ducks decided the word portulaca was very funny, for it sounded like Portugal. They poked each other and said, "Quack." He was really so witty. And now all the other ducks began to pay attention to the little songbird. The Portuguese certainly has a great command of language, they said. For our part, we haven't room in our beaks for such big words, but we have just as much sympathy anyway. Even if we don't actually do anything for you, at least we will go about quietly with you, and that we think is the nicest thing we can do. You have a lovely voice, said one of the older ducks. It must be a great satisfaction to you to give so many as much pleasure as you do. I don't really understand singing, so I keep my beak shut. That's better than chattering nonsense to you the way the others do. Don't bother him, said the Portuguese. He needs rest and care. My little songbird, do you want me to give you another shower bath? Oh no, please let me stay dry, he begged. The water cure is the only that does me any good when I'm sick, said the Portuguese. But amusement helps too. The neighboring hens will soon be coming to visit us. There are 2 Chinese hens among them. They wear breeches, are well educated, and have been imported, so they stand higher than the others in my esteem. And the hens came, and the cock came with them. Today he was polite enough not to be rude. You're a true songbird, he said, and you do all you possibly can with such a small voice as yours. But you should have a little steam power, so everyone would hear that you are a male. The 2 Chinese were enraptured at the appearance of the songbird. He was still very much rumpled up after his bath, so he looked to them like a little china chicken. He's charming, they cried, and then engaged themselves in conversation with him. They talked in whispers and with a P sound, in elegant Chinese. We belong to your race. The ducks, even the Portuguese one, are swimming birds, as you must have noticed. You don't know us yet. Not very many people take the trouble to know us. Not even any of the hens, though we were born to occupy a higher perch than most of the others. But that doesn't bother us. We go our way quietly among the others, whose ideals are quite different from ours. We look only at the bright side of things, and mention only what's good, though it's sometimes difficult to find something like that when there isn't anything. Besides us 2 and the cock, there is no one in the whole hen yard who is talented, and honesty does not exist among the inhabitants of this duck yard. We warn you, little songbird, don't trust that one over there with the short feathers in her tail. She's tricky. The spotted one there, with the crooked stripes on her wings, is always looking for an argument, and won't let anybody have the last word, though she's always in the wrong. The fat duck over there never has a good thing to say about anybody, and that is contrary to our nature. If we haven't something good to say, we keep our beaks shut. The Portuguese is the only one who has a little education and whom one can associate with, but she's hot-tempered and talks too much about Portugal. How those 2 Chinese are always whispering, said one of the ducks. They annoy me. I have never spoken to them. Now the drake came up, and he thought the little songbird was a sparrow. Well, I don't see any difference, he said. It's all the same, anyway. He's just a plaything, and if you have one, why, you have one. Don't pay any attention to what he says. The Portuguese whispered, "He is a very respectable businessman, and with him business always comes first. But now, I'm going to lie down for a rest. You owe that to yourself, so you'll be nice and fat when the time comes to be embalmed with apples and plums." And then she lay down in the sun and blinked one eye. She lay so comfortably and felt so well, and so she slept very comfortably. The little songbird busied himself with his broken wing, but finally he too lay down, pressed close beside his patroness. The sun was bright and warm. It was a good place to be. The neighbors' hens scurried about, scratching up the earth, for, to tell the truth, they had come visiting solely for the sake of getting something to eat. The Chinese were the first to leave the duck yard, and the other hens soon followed them. The witty little duck was talking about the Portuguese, and said the old lady was on the brink of duckdom's dotage. At this, the other ducks chuckled. "Duckdom's dotage," they cackled. "That's unusually witty." Then they repeated the other joke about Portulaca. That was very amusing to them. And then they lay down. They had been sleeping for some time when suddenly some food was thrown in for them. It landed with such a thump that the whole flock started up from sleep and flapped their wings. The Portuguese woke up, too, and rolled over on the other side, squeezing the little songbird very hard as she did so. "Peep," he said, "you stepped so hard on me, madam." "Well, why do you lie in the way?" she said. "You mustn't be so touchy. I have nerves too, but I have never yet said, 'Peep.'" "Please, don't be angry," said the little bird. "The peep slipped off my beak before I knew it." The Portuguese didn't listen to him, but began gobbling as fast as she could until she had made a good meal. When she had finished, she lay down again, and the little bird came up and tried to please her by singing, "Tilly lily lee, of your heart with glee I shall sing with love when I fly above." "I need to rest after my meal," said the Portuguese. "While you're here, you must follow the house rules. I want to take a nap now." The little songbird was quite bewildered, for he had only tried to please her. When she awoke later, he stood before her with a grain of corn he had found and laid it in front of her. But as she hadn't slept well, she was in a very bad humor. "You can give that to a chicken," she said, "and don't stand and hang over me." "Why are you angry with me?" he asked. "What have I done?" "Done?" said the Portuguese. "Your manner of expression isn't very refined. I must call your attention to that." "Yesterday it was all sunshine here," said the little bird. "But today it's dark and cloudy. It makes me very sad." "You don't know much about weather, I guess," said the Portuguese. "The day isn't over yet. Don't just stand there looking stupid. But you're looking at me just as those two wicked eyes did when I fell into the yard." "Impudent," said the Portuguese, "comparing me with the cat, a beast of prey. There's not a drop of wicked blood in me. I've stood up for you, and I'll have to teach you good manners." And with that she bit off the songbird's head, and he lay there dead. "Now, what does this mean?" she said. "Couldn't he even stand that? Then he certainly wasn't intended for this world. I know I've been like a mother to him because I have such a good heart." And then the neighbor's cock stuck his head into the yard and crowed like a steam engine. "Your crowing will kill me," she cried. "It's all your fault. He's lost his head, and I've nearly lost mine." "There isn't much left of him," said the cock. "You speak of him with respect," said the Portuguese, "because he had a voice and a fine education. He was tender and soft, and that's as good in animals as in so-called human beings." and all the ducks gathered around the little dead songbird. Ducks have strong passions, whether they feel envy or pity, and since there was no one here to envy, they all felt pity, and so did even the 2 Chinese hens. "We'll never find such a songbird again. He was almost a Chinese." And they both wept with a great clucking noise. All the other chickens clucked too, but the ducks walked around with the reddest eyes. "We have hearts," they said. "Nobody can deny that." "Hearts," said the Portuguese. "Yes, that we have. They're almost as tender as in Portugal." "Let us now think about getting something in our stomachs," said the drake. "That's the most important thing. If one of our playthings is broken, why, we have plenty more of them." The Dryad. We are traveling to Paris to the exhibition. Now we are there. That was a journey, a flight without magic. We flew on the wings of steam over the sea and across the land. Yes, our time is the time of fairy tales. We are in the midst of Paris, in a great hotel. Blooming flowers ornament the staircases, and soft carpets the floors. Our room is a very cozy one, and through the open balcony door we have a view of a great square. Spring lives down there. It has come to Paris and arrived at the same time with us. It has come in the shape of a glorious young chestnut tree with delicate leaves newly opened. How the tree gleams, dressed in its spring garb, before all the other trees in the place. One of these, latter, had been struck out of the list of living trees. It lies on the ground, with roots exposed. On the place where it stood, the young chestnut tree is to be planted and to flourish. It still stands towering aloft on the heavy wagon which has brought it this morning a distance of several miles to Paris. For years it had stood there, in the protection of a mighty oak tree, under which the old venerable clergyman had often sat, with children listening to his stories. The young chestnut tree had also listened to the stories, for the Dryad who lived in it was a child also. She remembered the time when the tree was so little that it only projected a short way above the grass and ferns around. These were as tall as they would ever be, but the tree grew every year and enjoyed the air and the sunshine and drank the dew and the rain. Several times it was also, as it must be, well shaken by the wind and the rain. For that is a part of education. The Dryad rejoiced in her life and rejoiced in the sunshine and the singing of the birds. But she was most rejoiced at human voices. She understood the language of men as well as she understood that of animals. Butterflies, cockchafers, dragonflies, everything that could fly came to pay a visit. They could all talk. They told of the village, of the vineyard, of the forest, of the old castle with its parks and canals and ponds. Down in the water dwelt also living beings, which, in their way, could fly under the water from one place to another. Beings with knowledge and delineation. They said nothing at all. They were so clever. And the swallow, who had dived, told about the pretty little goldfish, of the thick turbot, the fat brill, and the old carp. The swallow could describe all that very well, but self is the man, she said. One ought to see these things oneself. But how was the Dryad ever to see such beings? She was obliged to be satisfied with being able to look over the beautiful country and see the busy industry of men. It was glorious, but most glorious of all, when the old clergyman sat under the oak tree and talked of France, and of the great deeds of her sons and daughters, whose names will be mentioned with admiration through all time. Then the Dryad heard of the shepherd girl, Joan of Arc, and of Charlotte Corday, She heard about Henry IV and Napoleon I. She heard names whose echo sounds in the hearts of the people. The village children listened attentively, and the Dryad no less attentively. She became a school child with the rest. In the clouds that went sailing by, she saw, picture by picture, everything that she heard talked about. The cloudy sky was her picture book. She felt so happy in beautiful France, the fruitful land of genius, with the crater of freedom. But in her heart the sting remained that the bird, that every animal that could fly, was much better off than she. Even the fly could look about more in the world, far beyond the Dryad's horizon. France was so great and so glorious, but she could only look across a little piece of it. The land stretched out worldwide, with vineyards, forests, and great cities. Of all these, Paris was the most splendid and the mightiest. The birds could get there, but she never. Among the village children was a little ragged, poor girl, but a pretty one to look at. She was always laughing or singing and twining red flowers in her black hair. "Don't go to Paris," the old clergyman warned her. "Poor child, if you go there it will be your ruin." But she went for all that. The Dryad often thought of her, for she had the same wish and felt the same longing for the great city. The Dryad's tree was bearing its first chestnut blossoms. The birds were twittering round them in the most beautiful sunshine. Then a stately carriage came rolling along that way, and in it sat a grand lady driving the spirited, light-footed horses. On the back seat, a little smart groom balanced himself. The Dryad knew the lady, and the old clergyman knew her also. He shook his head gravely when he saw her and said, "So you went there after all, and it was your ruin, poor Mary." "That one poor?" thought the Dryad. "No, she wears a dress fit for a countess." She had become one in the city of magic changes. Oh, if I were only there, amid all the splendor and pomp. They shine up into the very clouds at night. When I look up, I can tell in what direction the town lies. Towards that direction the Dryad looked every evening. She saw in the dark night the gleaming cloud on the horizon. In the clear moonlight, nights she missed the sailing clouds, which showed her pictures of the city and pictures from history. The child grasps at the picture books. The Dryad grasped at the cloud world, her thought book. A sudden cloudless sky was for her a blank leaf, and for several days she had only had such leaves before her. It was in the warm summertime. Not a breeze moved through the glowing hot days. Every leaf, every flower lay as if it were torpid, and the people seemed torpid too. Then the clouds arose and covered the region round about where the gleaming mist announced, "Here lies Paris." The clouds piled themselves up like a chain of mountains, hurried on through the air, and spread themselves abroad over the whole landscape as far as the Dryad's eye could reach. Like enormous blue-black blocks of rock, the clouds lay piled over one another. Gleams of lightning shot forth from them. "These also are the servants of the Lord God," the old clergyman had said. And there came a bluish, dazzling flash of lightning, a lighting up as if of the sun itself, which could burst blocks of rock asunder. The lightning struck and split to the roots the old, venerable oak. The crown fell asunder. It seemed as if the tree were stretching forth its arms to clasp the messengers of the light. No bronze cannon can sound over the land at the birth of a royal child, as the thunder sounded at the death of the old oak. The rain streamed down, a refreshing wind was blowing, The storm had gone by, and there was quite a holiday glow on all things. The old clergyman spoke a few words for honorable remembrance, and a painter made a drawing as a lasting record of the tree. "Everything passes away," said the Dryad, "passes away like a cloud, and never comes back." The old clergyman, too, did not come back. The green roof of his school was gone, and his teaching chair had vanished. The children did not come, but autumn came, and winter came, and then spring also. In all this change of seasons, the Dryad looked toward the region where, at night, Paris gleamed with its bright mist far on the horizon. Forth from the town rushed engine after engine, train after train, whistling and screaming at all hours in the day. In the evening, towards midnight, at daybreak, and all the day through, came the trains. Out of each one, and into each one, streamed people from the country of every king. A new wonder of the world had summoned them to Paris. In what form did this wonder exhibit itself? "A splendid blossom of art and industry," said one, "has unfolded itself in the Champ de Mars, a gigantic sunflower, from whose petals one can learn geography and statistics, and can become as wise as a Lord Mayor, and raise one's self to the level of art and poetry, and study the greatness and power of the various lands." "A fairy tale flower," said another. "A many-colored lotus plant, which spreads out its green leaves like a velvet carpet over the sand. The opening spring has brought it forth. The summer will see it in all its splendor. The autumn winds will sweep it away, so that not a leaf, not a fragment of its root shall remain. In front of the military school extends in time of peace the arena of war, a field without a blade of grass, a piece of sandy steppe, as if cut out of the desert of Africa, where Fata Morgana displays her wondrous airy castles and hanging gardens. In the Champ de Mars, however, these were to be seen more splendid, more wonderful than in the East, for human art had converted the airy, deceptive scenes into reality. "The Aladdin's palace of the present has been built," it was said. "Day by day, hour by hour, it unfolds more of its wonderful splendor. The endless halls shine in marble and many colors. Master bloodless. Here moves his limbs of steel and iron in the great circular hall of machinery. Works of art in metal, in stone, in Gobelin's tapestry, announce the vitality of mind that is stirring in every land. Halls of paintings, splendor of flowers, everything that mind and skill can create in the workshop of the artisan has been placed here for show. Even the memorials of ancient days, out of old graves and turf moors, have appeared at this general meeting. The overpowering great variegated whole must be divided into small portions and pressed together like a plaything if it is to be understood and described. Like a great table on Christmas Eve, the Champ de Mars carried a wonder castle of industry and art, and around this knickknacks from all countries had been ranged, knickknacks on a grand scale, for every nation found some remembrance of home. Here stood the royal palace of Egypt, there the caravanserai of the desert land. The Bedouin had quitted his sunny country and hastened by on his camel. Here stood the Russian stables with the fiery, glorious horses of the steppe. Here stood the simple, straw-thatched dwelling of the Danish peasant with the Dannebrog flag. Next to Gustavus Vasa's wooden house from Dalarn with its wonderful carvings. American huts, English cottages, French pavilions, kiosks, theaters, churches, all strewn around, and between them the fresh green turf, the clear springing water, blooming bushes, rare trees, hothouses in which one might fancy one's self transported into the tropical forest, whole gardens brought from Damascus and blooming under one roof. What colors, what fragrance! Artificial grottos surrounded bodies of fresh or salt water and gave a glimpse into the empire of the fishes. The visitor seemed to wander at the bottom of the sea among fishes and polypi. All this, they said, the Champ de Mars offers. And around the great, richly spread table, the crowd of human beings moves like a busy swarm of ants, on foot or in little carriages, for not all feet are equal to such a fatiguing journey. Hither they swarm from morning till late in the evening. Steamer after steamer, crowded with people, glides down the Seine. The number of carriages is continually on the increase. The swarm of people on foot and on horseback grows more and more dense. Carriages and omnibuses are crowded, stuffed, and embroidered with people. All these tributary streams flow in one direction, towards the exhibition. On every entrance, the flag of France is displayed. Around the world's bazaar wave the flags of all nations. There is a humming and a murmuring from the hall of the machines. From the towers, the melody of the chimes is heard. With the tones of the organs in the churches mingle the hoarse, nasal songs from the cafes of the East. It is a kingdom of Babel, a wonder of the world. In very truth, it was. That's what all the reports said, and who did not hear them? The Dryad knew everything that is told here of the new wonder in the city of cities. Fly away, ye birds, fly away to sea, and then come back and tell me, said the Dryad. The wish became an intense desire, became the one thought of a life. Then, in the quiet, silent night, while the full moon was shining, the Dryad saw a spark fly out of the moon's disk and fall like a shooting star. And before the tree, whose leaves waved to and fro as if they were stirred by a tempest, stood a noble, mighty, and grand figure. In tones that were at once rich and strong, like the trumpet of the last judgment, bidding farewell to life and summoning to the great account, it said, "Thou shalt go to the city of magic. Thou shalt take root there and enjoy the mighty rushing breezes, the air and the sunshine there. But the time of thy life shall then be shortened. The line of years that awaited thee here amid the free nature shall shrink to but a small tale. Poor Dryad, it shall be thy destruction. Thy yearning and longing will increase. Thy desire will grow more stormy. The tree itself will be as a prison to thee. Thou wilt quit thy cell and give up thy nature to fly out and mingle among men. Then the years that would have belonged to thee will be contracted to half the span of the ephemeral fly that lives but a day. One night, and thy life taper shall be blown out. The leaves of the tree will wither and be blown away, to become green never again." Thus the words sounded, and the light vanished away, but not the longing of the Dryad. She trembled in the wild fever of expectation. "I shall go there," she cried rejoicingly. "Life is beginning and swells like a cloud. Nobody knows whither it is hastening." When the gray dawn arose and the moon turned pale and the clouds were tinted red, the wished-for hour struck. The words of promise were fulfilled. People appeared with spades and poles. They dug round the roots of the tree, deeper and deeper, and beneath it, a wagon was brought out, drawn by many horses, and the tree was lifted up, with its roots and the lumps of earth that adhered to them. Matting was placed around the roots, as though the tree had its feet in a warm bag. And now the tree was lifted on the wagon and secured with chains. The journey began. The journey to Paris. There the tree was to grow as an ornament to the city of French glory. The twigs and the leaves of the chestnut tree trembled in the first moments of its being moved, and the Dryad trembled in the pleasurable feeling of expectation. Away, away. It sounded in every beat of her pulse. Away, away. Sounded in words that flew trembling along. The Dryad forgot to bid farewell to the regions of home. She thought not of the waving grass and of the innocent daisies, which had looked up to her as to a great lady, a young princess playing at being a shepherdess out in the open air. The chestnut tree stood upon the wagon and nodded his branches, whether this meant farewell or forward. The Dryad knew not. She dreamed only of the marvelous new things that seemed yet so familiar and that were to unfold themselves before her. No child's heart rejoicing in innocence, no heart whose blood danced with passion, had set out on the journey to Paris more full of expectation than she. Her farewell sounded in the words, away, away. The wheels turned, the distant approached, the present vanished. The region was changed, even as the clouds change. New vineyards, forests, villages, villas appeared, came nearer, vanished. The chestnut tree moved forward, and the Dryad went with it. Steam engine after steam engine rushed past, sending up into the air vapory clouds that formed figures which told of Paris, whence they came, and whither the Dryad was going. Everything around knew it, and must know whither she was bound. It seemed to her as if every tree she passed stretched out its leaves towards her, with the prayer, "Take me with you, take me with you." For every tree enclosed a longing Dryad. What changes during this flight? Houses seemed to be rising out of the earth, more and more, thicker and thicker. The chimneys rose like flower pots ranged side by side, or in rows, one above the other, on the roofs. Great inscriptions in letters a yard long, and figures in various colors, covering the walls from cornice to basement, came brightly out. "Where does Paris begin, and when shall I be there?" asked the Dryad. The crowd of people grew. The tumult and the bustle increased. Carriage followed upon carriage. People on foot and people on horseback were mingled together. All around were shops on shops, music and song, crying and talking. The Dryad, in her tree, was now in the midst of Paris. The great heavy wagon all at once stopped on a little square planted with trees. The high houses around had all of them balconies to the windows, from which the inhabitants looked down upon the young, fresh chestnut tree, which was coming to be planted here as a substitute for the dead tree that lay stretched on the ground. The passers-by stood still and smiled in admiration of its pure, vernal freshness. The older trees, whose buds were still closed, whispered with their waving branches, "Welcome, welcome." The fountain, throwing its jet of water high up in the air to let it fall again in the wide stone basin, told the wind to sprinkle the newcomer with pearly drops, as if it wished to give him a refreshing draught to welcome him. The Dryad felt how her tree was being lifted from the wagon to be placed in the spot where it was to stand. The roots were covered with earth, and fresh turf was laid on top. Blooming shrubs and flowers in pots were ranged around, and thus a little garden arose in the square. The tree that had been killed by the fumes of gas, the steam of kitchens, and the bad air of the city was put upon the wagon and driven away. The passers-by looked on. Children and old men sat upon the bench and looked at the green tree. And we, who are telling this story, stood upon a balcony, and looked down upon the green spring sight that had been brought in from the fresh country air, and said what the old clergyman would have said, "Poor Dryad, I am happy, I am happy," the Dryad cried, rejoicing. "And yet I cannot realize, cannot describe what I feel. Everything is as I fancied it, and yet as I did not fancy it. The houses stood there, so lofty, so close. The sunlight shone on only one of the walls, and that one was stuck over with bills and placards, before which the people stood still. And this made a crowd. Carriages rushed past, carriages rolled past, light ones and heavy ones mingled together. Omnibuses, those overcrowded moving houses, came rattling by. Horsemen galloped among them, even carts and wagons asserted their rights. The Dryad asked herself if these high-grown houses, which stood so close around her, would not remove and take other shapes, like the clouds in the sky, and draw aside so that she might cast a glance into Paris and over it. Notre Dame must show itself, the Vendôme column, and the wondrous building which had called and was still calling so many strangers to the city. But the houses did not stir from their places. It was yet day when the lamps were lit. The gas jets gleamed from the shops and shone even into the branches of the trees, so that it was like sunlight in summer. The stars above made their appearance, the same to which the Dryad had looked up in her home. She thought she felt a clear, pure stream of air which went forth from them. She felt herself lifted up and strengthened, and felt an increased power of seeing through every leaf and through every fiber of the root. Amid all the noise and the turmoil, the colors and the lights, she knew herself watched by mild eyes. From the side streets sounded the merry notes of fiddles and wind instruments. Up to the dance, to jollity and pleasure. That was their invitation. Such music it was that horses, carriages, trees, and houses would have danced if they had known how. The charm of intoxicating delight filled the bosom of the Dryad. "How glorious, how splendid it is," she cried rejoicingly. "Now I am in Paris." The next day that dawned, the next night that fell, offered the same spectacle, similar bustle, similar life. Changing, indeed, yet always the same. And thus it went on through the sequence of days. Now I know every tree, every flower on the square here. I know every house, every balcony, every shop in this narrow cut-off corner, where I am denied the sight of this great, mighty city. Where are the arches of triumph, the boulevards, the wondrous building of the world? I see nothing of all this. As if shut up in a cage, I stand among the high houses, which I now know by heart, with their inscriptions, signs, and placards, all the painted confectionery that is no longer to my taste. Where are all the things of which I heard, for which I longed, and for whose sake I wanted to come hither? What have I seized, found, won? I feel the same longing I felt before. I feel that there is a life I should wish to grasp and to experience. I must go out into the ranks of living men and mingle among them. I must fly about like a bird. I must see and feel and become human altogether. I must enjoy the one half-day, instead of vegetating for years in everyday sameness and weariness, in which I become ill, and at last sink and disappear like the dew on the meadows. I will gleam like the cloud, gleam in the sunshine of life, look out over the whole like the cloud, and pass away like it, no one knoweth whither. Thus sighed the Dryad, and she prayed, Take from me the years that were destined for me, and give me but half of the life of the ephemeral fly. Deliver me from my prison. Give me human life, human happiness, only a short span, only the one night, if it cannot be otherwise. And then punish me for my wish to live, my longing for life. Strike me out of thy list. Let my shell, the fresh young tree, wither or be hewn down and burnt to ashes and scattered to all the winds. A rustling went through the leaves of the tree. There was a trembling in each of the leaves. It seemed as if fire streamed through it. A gust of wind shook its green crown, and from the midst of that crown, a female figure came forth. In the same moment, she was sitting beneath the brightly illuminated leafy branches, young and beautiful to behold, like poor Mary, to whom the clergyman had said, "The great city will be thy destruction." The Dryad sat at the foot of the tree, at her house door, which she had locked and whose key had thrown away. So young, so fair. The stars saw her and blinked at her. The gas lamps saw her and gleamed and beckoned to her. How delicate she was, and yet how blooming. A child, and yet a grown maiden. Her dress was fine as silk, green as the freshly opened leaves on the crown of the tree. In her nut-brown hair clung a half-opened chestnut blossom. She looked like the goddess of spring. For one short minute she sat motionless. Then she sprang up, and light as a gazelle, she hurried away. She ran and sprang like the reflection from the mirror that, carried by the sunshine, is cast, now here, now there. Could anyone have followed her with his eyes, he would have seen how marvelously. Her dress and her form changed according to the nature of the house or the place whose light happened to shine upon her. She reached the boulevards. Here a sea of light streamed forth from the gas flames of the lamps, the shops, and the cafes. Here stood in a row young and slender trees, each of which concealed its Dryad and gave shade from the artificial sunlight. The whole vast pavement was one great festive hall, where covered tables stood laden with refreshments of all kinds, from champagne and chartreuse down to coffee and beer. Here was an exhibition of flowers, statues, books, and colored stuffs. From the crowd close by the lofty houses, she looked forth over the terrific stream beyond the rows of trees. Yonder heaved a stream of rolling carriages, cabriolets, coaches, omnibuses, cabs, and among them riding gentlemen and marching troops. To cross to the opposite shore was an undertaking fraught with danger to life and limb. Now lanterns shed their radiance abroad. Now the gas had the upper hand. Suddenly a rocket rises. Whence? Whither? Here are sounds of soft Italian melodies. Yonder Spanish songs are sung, accompanied by the rattle of the castanets. But strongest of all, and predominating over the rest, the street organ tunes of the moment, the exciting can-can. Music, which Orpheus never knew, and which was never heard by the Belle Hélène. Even the barrow was tempted to hop upon one of its wheels. The Dryad danced, floated, flew, changing her color every moment, like a hummingbird in the sunshine. Each house, with the world belonging to it, gave her its own reflections. As the glowing lotus flower, torn from its stem, is carried away by the stream, so the Dryad drifted along. Whenever she paused, she was another being, so that none was able to follow her, to recognize her, or to look more closely at her. Like cloud pictures, all things flew by her. She looked into 1,000 faces, but not one was familiar to her. She saw not a single form from home. 2 bright eyes had remained in her memory. She thought of Mary. Poor Mary, the ragged Mary child, who wore the red flowers in her black hair. Mary was now here, in the world city, rich and magnificent, as in that day when she drove past the house of the old clergyman and past the tree of the Dryad, the old oak. Here she was certainly living in the deafening tumult. Perhaps she had just stepped out of one of the gorgeous carriages in waiting, handsome equipages with coachmen in gold braid and footmen in silken hose drove up. The people who alighted from them were all richly dressed ladies. They went through the opened gate and ascended the broad staircase that led to a building resting on marble pillars. Was this building, perhaps, the wonder of the world? There, Mary would certainly be found. Sancta Maria resounded from the interior. Incense floated through the lofty, painted and gilded aisles, where a solemn twilight reigned. It was the Church of the Madeleine. Clad in black garments of the most costly stuffs, fashioned according to the latest mode, the rich feminine world of Paris glided across the shining pavement. The crests of the proprietors were engraved on silver shields, on the velvet-bound prayer books, and embroidered in the corners of perfumed handkerchiefs bordered with Brussels lace. A few of the ladies were kneeling in silent prayer before the altars. Others resorted to the confessionals. Anxiety and fear took possession of the Dryad. She felt as if she had entered a place where she had no right to be. Here was the abode of silence, the hall of secrets. Everything was said in whispers. Every word was a mystery. The Dryad saw herself enveloped in lace and silk, like the women of wealth and of high birth around her. Had, perhaps, every one of them a longing in her breast, like the Dryad? A deep, painful sigh was heard. Did it escape from some confessional in a distant corner, or from the bosom of the Dryad? She drew the veil closer around her. She breathed incense, and not the fresh air. Here was not the abiding place of her longing. Away, away, a hastening without rest. The ephemeral fly knows not repose, for her existence is flight. She was out again among the gas candelabra by a magnificent fountain. All its streaming waters are not able to wash out the innocent blood that was spilt here. Such were the words spoken. Strangers stood around, carrying on a lively conversation, such as no one would have dared to carry on in the gorgeous Hall of Secrets whence the Dryad came. A heavy stone slab was turned and then lifted. She did not understand why. She saw an opening that led into the depths below. The strangers stepped down, leaving the starlit air and the cheerful life of the upper world behind them. "I am afraid," said one of the women who stood around to her husband. "I cannot venture to go down, nor do I care for the wonders down yonder. You had better stay here with me." "Indeed, and travel home," said the man, "and quit Paris without having seen the most wonderful thing of all, the real wonder of the present period, created by the power and resolution of one man." "I will not go down for all that," was the reply. The wonder of the present time, it had been called. The Dryad had heard and had understood it. The goal of her ardent longing had thus been reached, and here was the entrance to it. Down into the depths below. Paris? She had not thought of such a thing, but now she heard it said, and saw the strangers descending, and went after them. The staircase was of cast iron, spiral, broad, and easy. Below there burned a lamp, and farther down another. They stood in a labyrinth of endless halls and arched passages, all communicating with each other. All the streets and lanes of Paris were to be seen here again, as in a dim reflection. The names were painted up, and every house above had its number down here also, and struck its roots under the macadamized quays of a broad canal, in which the muddy water flowed onward. Over it, the fresh streaming water was carried on arches, and quite at the top hung the tangled net of gas pipes and telegraph wires. In the distance, lamps gleamed like a reflection from the world city above. Every now and then, a dull rumbling was heard. This came from the heavy wagons rolling over the entrance bridges. Whither had the Dryad come? You have, no doubt, heard of the catacombs. Now they are vanishing points in that new underground world, that wonder of the present day, the sewers of Paris. The Dryad was there, and not in the world's exhibition in the Champ de Mars. She heard exclamations of wonder and admiration. From here go forth health and life for thousands upon thousands up yonder. Our time is the time of progress, with its manifold blessings. Such was the opinion and the speech of men, but not of those creatures who had been born here, and who built and dwelt here. Of the rats, namely, who were squeaking to one another in the clefts of a crumbling wall, quite plainly, and in a way the Dryad understood well. A big old father rat, with his tail bitten off, was relieving his feelings in loud squeaks, and his family gave their tribute of concurrence to every word he said. "I am disgusted with this man-mewing," he cried, "with these outbursts of ignorance. A fine magnificence, truly, all made up of gas and petroleum. I can't eat such stuff as that. Everything here is so fine and bright now that one's ashamed of oneself, without exactly knowing why. Ah, if we only lived in the days of tallow candles, and it does not lie so very far behind us. That was a romantic time, as one may say." "What are you talking of there?" asked the Dryad. "I have never seen you before. What is it you are talking about?" "Of the glorious days that are gone," said the rat. "Of the happy time of our great-grandfathers and great-grandmothers. Then it was a great thing to get down here. That was a rat's nest quite different from Paris. Mother Plague used to live here then. She killed people, but never rats. Robbers and smugglers could breathe freely here. Here was the meeting place of the most interesting personages, whom one now only gets to see in the theaters where they act melodrama. Up above. The time of romance is gone even in our rat's nest, and here also fresh air and petroleum have broken in." Thus squeaked the rat. He squeaked in honor of the old time, when Mother Plague was still alive. A carriage stopped, a kind of open omnibus drawn by swift horses. The company mounted and drove away along the Boulevard de Sebastopol, that is to say, the underground boulevard, over which the well-known crowded street of that name extended. The carriage disappeared in the twilight. The Dryad disappeared, lifted to the cheerful freshness above. Here, and not below, in the vaulted passages, filled with heavy air, the wonder-work must be found which she was to seek in her short lifetime. It must gleam brighter than all the gas flames, stronger than the moon that was just gliding past. Yes, certainly. She saw it yonder in the distance. It gleamed before her, and twinkled and glittered like the evening star in the sky. She saw a glittering portal open that led to a little garden, where all was brightness and dance music. Colored lamps surrounded little lakes, in which were water plants of colored metal, from whose flowers jets of water spurted up. Beautiful weeping willows, real products of spring, hung their fresh branches over these lakes like a fresh, green, transparent, and yet screening veil. In the bushes burnt an open fire, throwing a red twilight over the quiet huts of branches. into which the sounds of music penetrated. An ear-tickling, intoxicating music that sent the blood coursing through the veins. Beautiful girls in festive attire, with pleasant smiles on their lips and the light spirit of youth in their hearts. Marys, with roses in their hair, but without carriage and postilion, flitted to and fro in the wild dance. Where were the heads? Where the feet? As if stung by tarantulas, they sprang, laughed, rejoiced, as if in their ecstasies they were going to embrace all the world. The Dryad felt herself torn with them into the whirl of the dance. Round her delicate foot clung the silken boot, chestnut brown in color, like the ribbon that floated from her hair down upon her bare shoulders. The green silk dress waved in large folds, but did not entirely hide the pretty foot and ankle. Had she come to the enchanted garden of Armida? What was the name of the place? The name glittered in gas jets over the entrance. It was Mabille. The soaring upwards of rockets, the splashing of fountains, and the popping of champagne corks accompanied the wild, bacchantic dance. Over the whole glided the moon through the air, clear, but with a somewhat crooked face. A wild joviality seemed to rush through the Dryad as though she were intoxicated with opium. Her eyes spoke, her lips spoke, but the sound of violins and of flutes drowned the sound of her voice. Her partner whispered words to her which she did not understand, nor do we understand them. He stretched out his arms to draw her to him, but he embraced only the empty air. The Dryad had been carried away, like a rose leaf on the wind. Before her she saw a flame in the air, a flashing light high up on a tower. The beacon light shone from the goal of her longing, shone from the red lighthouse tower of the Fata Morgana, of the Champ de Mars. Thither she was carried by the wind. She circled round the tower. The workmen thought it was a butterfly that had come too early, and that now sank down dying. The moon shone bright. Gas lamps spread light around. Through the halls, over the all-world's buildings scattered about, over the rose hills and the rocks produced by human ingenuity, from which waterfalls, driven by the power of Master Bloodless, fell down. The caverns of the sea, the depths of the lakes, the kingdom of the fishes were opened here. Men walked as in the depths of the deep pond, and held converse with the sea, in the diving bell of glass. The water pressed against the strong glass walls above and on every side. The polypi, eel-like living creatures, had fastened themselves to the bottom and stretched out arms, fathoms long, for prey. A big turbot was making himself broad in front, quietly enough, but not without casting some suspicious glances aside. A crab clambered over him, looking like a gigantic spider, while the shrimps wandered about in restless haste, like the butterflies and moths of the sea. In the fresh water grew water lilies, nymphea, and reeds. The goldfishes stood up below in rank and file, all turning their heads one way, that the streaming water might flow into their mouths. Fat carps stared at the glass wall with stupid eyes. They knew that they were here to be exhibited, and that they had made the somewhat toilsome journey hither in tubs filled with water. And they thought with dismay of the land sickness from which they had suffered so cruelly on the railway. They had come to see the exhibition, and now contemplated it from their fresh or saltwater position. They looked attentively at the crowds of people who passed by them early and late. All the nations in the world, they thought, had made an exhibition of their inhabitants, for the edification of the soles and haddocks, pike and carp. that they might give their opinions upon the different kinds. "Those are scaly animals," said a little slimy whiting. "They put on different scales 2 or 3 times a day, and they emit sounds which they call speaking. We don't put on scales, and we make ourselves understood in an easier way, simply by twitching the corners of our mouths and staring with our eyes. We have a great many advantages over mankind. But they have learned swimming of us," remarked a well-educated codling. "You must know I come from the great sea outside. In the hot time of the year, the people yonder go into the water. First, they take off their scales, and then they swim. They have learnt from the frogs to kick out with their hind legs and row with their forepaws. But they cannot hold out long. They want to be like us, but they cannot come up to us. Poor people." And the fishes stared. They thought that the whole swarm of people whom they had seen in the bright daylight were still moving around them. They were certain they still saw the same forms that had first caught their attention. A pretty barbel, with spotted skin and an enviably round back, declared that the human fry were still there. "I can see a well-set-up human figure quite well," said the barbel. "She was called Contumacious Lady, or something of that kind. She had a mouth and staring eyes like ours, and a great balloon at the back of her head, and something like a shut-up umbrella in front. There were a lot of dangling bits of seaweed hanging about her. She ought to take all the rubbish off and go as we do. Then she would look something like a respectable barbel, so far as it is possible for a person to look like one. What's become of that one whom they drew away with the hook? He sat on a wheelchair and had paper and pen and ink and wrote down everything. They called him a writer. They're going about with him still," said a hoary old maid of a carp, who carried her misfortune about with her so that she was quite hoarse. In her youth, she had once swallowed a hook and still swam patiently about with it in her gullet. "A writer? That means, as we fishes describe it, a kind of cuttle or inkfish among men." Thus the fishes gossiped in their own way, but in the artificial water grotto the laborers were busy, who were obliged to take advantage of the hours of night to get their work done by daybreak. They accompanied with blows of their hammers, and with songs the parting words of the vanishing Dryad. "So, at any rate, I have seen you, you pretty goldfishes," she said. "Yes, I know you." And she waved her hand to them. "I have known about you a long time in my home. The swallow told me about you. How beautiful you are, how delicate and shining. I should like to kiss every one of you. You others also. I know you all, but you do not know me." The fishes stared out into the twilight. They did not understand a word of it. The Dryad was there no longer. She had been a long time in the open air, where the different countries, the country of black bread, the codfish coast, the kingdom of Russia leather, and the banks of eau de Cologne, and the gardens of rose oil, exhaled their perfumes from the world wonder flower. When, after a night at a ball, we drive home half asleep and half awake, the melodies still sound plainly in our ears. We hear them and could sing them all from memory. When the eye of the murdered man closes, the picture of what it saw last clings to it for a time, like a photographic picture. So it was likewise here. The bustling life of day had not yet disappeared in the quiet night. The Dryad had seen it, she knew, thus it will be repeated tomorrow. The Dryad stood among the fragrant roses and thought she knew them and had seen them in her own home. She also saw red pomegranate flowers, like those that little Mary had worn in her dark hair. Remembrances from the home of her childhood flashed through her thoughts. Her eyes eagerly drank in the prospect around, and feverish restlessness chased her through the wonder-filled halls. A weariness that increased continually took possession of her. She felt a longing to rest on the soft oriental carpets within, or to lean against the weeping willow without by the clear water. But for the ephemeral fly, there was no rest. In a few moments the day had completed its circle. Her thoughts trembled, her limbs trembled. She sank down on the grass by the bubbling water. "Thou wilt ever spring living from the earth," she said mournfully. "Moisten my tongue, bring me a refreshing draught." "I am no living water," was the answer. "I only spring upward when the machine wills it." "Give me something of thy freshness, thou green grass," implored the Dryad. "Give me one of thy fragrant flowers, ye." "We must die if we are torn from our stalks," replied the flowers and the grass. "Give me a kiss, thou fresh stream of air, only a single life kiss." "Soon the sun will kiss the clouds red," answered the wind. "Then thou wilt be among the dead, blown away, as all the splendor here will be blown away before the year shall have ended. Then I can play again with the light, loose sand on the place here, and whirl the dust over the land and through the air. All is dust." The Dryad felt a terror like a woman who has cut asunder her pulse artery in the bath, but is filled again with the love of life, even while she is bleeding to death. She raised herself, tottered forward a few steps, and sank down again at the entrance to a little church. The gate stood open, lights were burning upon the altar, and the organ sounded. What music! Such notes the Dryad had never yet heard, and yet it seemed to her as if she recognized a number of well-known voices among them. They came deep from the heart of all creation. She thought she heard the stories of the old clergymen, of great deeds, and of the celebrated names, and of the gifts that the creatures of God must bestow upon posterity, if they would live on in the world. The tones of the organ swelled, and in their song there sounded these words: "Thy wishing and thy longing have torn thee, with thy roots, from the place which God appointed for thee. That was thy destruction, thou poor Dryad." The notes became soft and gentle, and seemed to die away in a wail. In the sky the clouds showed themselves with a ruddy gleam. The wind sighed. "Pass away, ye dead, now the sun is going to rise." The first ray fell on the Dryad. Her form was irradiated in changing colors, like the soap bubble when it is bursting and becomes a drop of water, like a tear that falls and passes away like a vapor. Poor Dryad! Only a dewdrop, only a tear, poured upon the earth and vanished away. Chicken Grethe's family. Chicken Grethe was the only human tenant of the fine new house that was built for the hens and ducks on the estate. It was built where the old baronial castle had stood with its tower, crow's perch gable, moat, and drawbridge. Close by was a complete wilderness of trees and bushes. This had been the garden, running down to a big lake which was now a marsh. Rooks, crows, and jackdaws, a whole horde of screeching, cawing birds, hovered over the trees. The flock did not seem to diminish, but rather to increase when one fired among them. They could be heard even inside the poultry house, where Chicken Grethe sat with the ducklings waddling about her wooden shoes. She knew each chicken and every duck from the moment it hatched. She took pride in her chickens and her ducks, and in the fine house that had been built for them. Her little room was clean and tidy. Her mistress, who owned the chicken house, insisted upon neatness. for she frequently brought distinguished visitors to see the barracks of her hens and ducks, as she called the place. She had a rocking chair and a wardrobe, and even a chest of drawers, on which stood a highly polished brass plate with the name Grubba engraved on it. This was the name of the old, noble family that had lived there in the days when the castle was standing. The brass plate had been found while they were digging the ground, and the parish clerk said that it had no value except as a relic. The clerk knew all about the place and the old days, for he was a scholar, and his table drawer was filled with manuscripts. He knew much about the old days, but perhaps the oldest crow knew more and jabbered it out in his own language. But that was crow talk, which the clerk did not understand, learned though he was. Toward the end of hot summer day, the mist would rise over the marsh until it looked as if there were a lake beyond the old trees where the rooks, crows, and jackdaws lived. This was how it had looked when old Sir Grubba had lived there, and the castle with its massive red walls was still standing. In those days, the dog's chain used to reach clear across the gateway. By way of the tower, one came to the stone-flagged passage that led to the living quarters. The windows were narrow and the panes quite small, even in the great hall where they used to dance. But in the days of the last Grubbs, there had been no dancing for as far back as a man could remember, though an old kettle drum that had been used in the orchestra still remained in the hall. And there was also a curiously carved cupboard in which the rare flower bulbs were stored, for Lady Grubba took pleasure in planting and in cultivating flowers and trees. Her husband preferred to hunt wild boars and wolves, and his little daughter, Marie, always rode with him. When she was no more than 5 years old, she sat proudly on horseback and gazed fearlessly about with her great, dark eyes. She delighted in cracking her whip among the hounds, though her father would rather have seen her lash out among the peasant boys who came to stare at the gentry. The peasant who lived in a clay hut near the castle had a son named Søren, who was of the same age as the well-born little lady. He knew how to climb trees, and he had to bring bird nests down to her. The birds screamed as loud as they could scream, and one of the largest of them struck him so hard right above his eye that blood ran down, and they thought at first that he had lost an eye, but it had not been injured. Marie Grubba called him her Søren, a sign of high favor which once served to protect even his father, poor John. When he had done something wrong one day, John was condemned to ride the wooden horse. This contrivance stood in the yard, with 4 poles for legs, and for its back a single small rail, which John had to straddle. Lest he ride it too comfortably, heavy bricks were tied to his feet. He made such agonized faces that little Søren wept and went down on his knees to beg Marie to have his father released. She instantly commanded that his father should be taken down. When she was not obeyed, Marie stamped her small feet on the flagstones and tugged at her father's coat sleeve until she tore it. She would have her way, and she got it. Søren's father was released. Lady Grubba came to her, stroked her hair, and looked at her daughter with mild, approving eyes. But Marie did not understand why. She would go with the hounds, not with her mother, who went down through the garden to the lake, where the water lilies bloomed and where the bulrushes swayed among the reeds. "How charming," Lady Grubba would say, as she admired this fresh, abundant growth. A then very rare tree, which she herself had planted, grew in her garden. A blood beech it was called, a sort of dark moor among the other trees, so dark brown were its leaves. It needed plenty of sunlight, for in constant shade its leaves would turn green like those of other trees, and thus lose their distinction. In her tall chestnut trees, in the shrubbery, and even the grass were many bird nests. The birds seemed to understand that they were safe here, where no one dared fire a gun. But little Marie came here with Søren, who, as we know, could climb, and she sent him to bring her down both the eggs and the downy little birds. The parent birds fluttered about in terror and anguish, large and small, lapwings from the lawns, rooks, crows, and jackdaws. From the tall trees, they screamed and shrieked just as their progeny shriek today. "Children, what are you doing?" the gentlewoman cried. "What a wicked thing to do." Søren looked ashamed, and even the high-born young girl looked a little embarrassed. But then she said in an abrupt and sulky way, "My father lets me do this. Away, away!" The black birds shrieked, and away they flew, but they came back the next day because they lived there. But the quiet gentlewoman did not live there much longer. The Lord called her away, and with him she was more at home than ever she was in this house. The church bells solemnly tolled as her body was carried to the church, and poor men's eyes grew dim, for she had shown them kindness. And now that she was gone, no one looked after her plants, so the garden went to rack and ruin. "Sir Grubb is a hard man," people would say, "but young as she is, his daughter can handle him." He would laugh and let her have her will. She was 12 years old now, tall and well-built. She looked right through people with her great dark eyes, rode her horse like a man, and shot her gun like an experienced hunter. It came to pass that great men visited that district. They were as great can be, the young king with his half-brother and crony, Lord Ulrich Frederick Gildenlöv. They came to hunt wild boar, and they planned to stay overnight at Sir Grubba's castle. At the table, when Gildenlöv sat beside Marie, he took her about the neck and gave her a kiss, just as if they had been related. But she gave him a slap in the face and told him she could not stand him. This caused great laughter, as if it were a most pleasing sight. And maybe it was, because 5 years later, when Marie was 17, Gildenlöv sent a messenger with a letter asking for her hand in marriage. That was something. "He is the highest and most gallant lord in the land," said Sir Grubba. "You cannot refuse him." "I don't like him much," Marie Grubba said, but she did not turn down the highest lord in the land, who sat next to the king. Her silver, woolens, and linens were sent by ship to Copenhagen. Marie made the trip overland in 10 days, but the ship with the dowry met with contrary winds, or no wind at all. It took 4 months to reach Copenhagen, and when it did get there, Lady Gildenlöv had gone. "I'd sooner lie on sacks than in his silken bed," she said. "I'd sooner walk barefoot than ride in a carriage with him." Late on an evening in November, 2 women came riding into the town of Aarhus. They were Lady Gildenlöv and her maid. They came from Vejle, where they had arrived by ship from Copenhagen. They rode up to Sir Grubba's townhouse. He was not at all pleased to see Marie. He gave her harsh words, but he did give her a bedroom. She got her beer broth for breakfast, but no good words to go with it. Her father's bad temper had turned against her, and she was not used to it. Her own temper was by no means mild. As one is spoken to, so one answers, and answer she did. Of her husband, she spoke with bitterness and hatred. She declared that she could not live with him. She was too honorable and virtuous for that. In this fashion, a year went by, most unpleasantly. Bitter words passed between father and daughter. That should not be. Bitter words bear bitter fruit. What would be the outcome? One day, her father said, "We cannot live under the same roof. You must move to our old castle. I would rather you bit off your tongue than spoke lies." So they parted. With her maid, she went to the old estate where she was born and bred, and where her mother, that pious gentlewoman, lay in the churchyard vault. An old cowherd lived in the castle, and that was all. Cobwebs, heavy and black with dirt, draped every room. The garden was not taken care of. Wild hops and other climbing vines wove a tangled web between trees and shrubbery. Hemlock and nettles grew tall and rank. The blood beech had been outgrown, and in the deep shade its leaves had turned as green as those of ordinary trees. Its glory was gone. Rooks, crows, and jackdaws flew in enormous flocks above the tall chestnuts. They shrieked and cawed as if they had great news to tell each other. Here she was again, the girl who ordered their eggs and babies to be stolen from their nests. The real thief, the one who had actually stolen them, was now climbing a leafless tree. He clung to the tall ship's mast and got his share of lashes with a rope's end if he didn't behave himself. All this was told in our own time by the parish clerk. He had pieced it together from books and letters, and it lay with many another manuscript hidden away in his table drawer. "Up and down is the way the world goes," said he. "It's a curious story to hear. We want to hear how it went with Marie Grubbe, but we shall not lose track of Chicken Grethe, who sat there in her fine hen house in our own day. Marie Grubbe sat in this place in her day, but not so contentedly as old Chicken Grethe. Winter went by, spring and summer passed, and again came the stormy autumn with its cold and wet fog. It was a dull and dreary life there on the old estate. Marie Grubbe would snatch up her gun and go out on the heath to shoot hares or foxes and whatever birds she could find. More than once on these excursions, she encountered a nobleman, Sir Palle Dyer from Nuremberg, with his gun and his dogs. He was a big man who enjoyed boasting of his strength when he talked with her. He might have been a match for the departed Mr. Brockenhuis of Egeskov at Fienne, whom people still remember as a man of might. Like him, Palle Dyer had fastened a hunting horn to an iron chain over his gateway. When he came home, he would catch hold of the chain, lift himself and his horse clear off the ground, and sound the horn. "You must come to my castle and see that, Lady Marie," he said, "for we have fine, fresh air at Nuremberg." Oh, we have no record of when she went to Nuremberg, but on the candlesticks at Nuremberg Church, it is inscribed that they were given by Palle Dyer and Marie Grubbe of Nuremberg Castle. Body and strength had Palle Dyer. He could drink like a sponge. He was like a cask that could never be filled. He snored enough for a whole pig pen, and he looked red and bloated. "A cunning swine and a nagging fool he is," said Lady Palle Dyer, the daughter of Grubbe. She soon grew weary of the life there, which did not improve matters. At dinner-time one day, the food got cold on the table. Palle Dyer was off fox hunting, and Lady Dyer could not be found. Palle Dyer came home at midnight. Lady Dyer came home neither by midnight nor by morning. She turned her back upon Nuremberg and rode away without a word of farewell. The weather was cloudy and wet. The wind was sharp, and the flock of black birds that croaked over her head were not as homeless as she. First, she rode south, almost to Germany. She turned a couple of gold rings with precious stones into ready money. She went east and she went west, with no fixed goal. She was angry with everybody, and even with the good Lord himself. So sick was her mind. And soon her body was sick too. She could scarcely drag her feet along. The lapwing flew up from its tuft of grass when she stumbled upon it and fell. The bird screamed, as it always does, "You thief! You thief!" Yet she had never stolen her neighbor's goods, except for the birds' eggs and nestlings taken from the clumps of grass and the tall trees when she was a little girl. She thought of that now. From where she lay, she could see the sand dunes along the beach. Fishermen lived there, but she was too ill to crawl so far. The great white seagulls came screaming over her as the rooks, crows, and jackdaws screamed above the trees at home. The birds flew nearer and nearer, until at last she thought they were blackbirds. But then everything went black before her eyes. When she opened her eyes again, she was being carried in the arms of a tall, strapping fellow. She looked straight into his bearded face and saw that he had a scar over one eye that appeared to divide the eyebrow in two. Sick as she was, he carried her to his ship, where he was abused by the shipmaster for bringing such a burden. The ship set sail next day. Marie Grubb sailed with it. She was not put ashore. Didn't she ever come back? Yes, but when and how? The parish clerk could tell about this too. It was not a tale which he had pieced together. He had the whole strange story from a reliable book which we can get and read for ourselves. The Danish author, Ludvig Holberg, who has written so many books worth reading and so many gay comedies by which we get to know his time and its people, mentions Marie Grubbe in his letters, which tell how and in what part of the world he found her. This is well worth hearing, but we shall not lose track of Chicken Grethe, who sits so happy and comfortable in her imposing chicken house. The ship sailed off with Marie Grubbe. That was where we left off. Year upon year went by. The plague was raging in Copenhagen. That was in the year of 1711. The Queen of Denmark went to her German home. The king left his capital, and everyone who could made haste to leave. The students, even those who had free board and lodging, scurried out of the city. One of them, the last student left at what they called Borch's College, near the students' headquarters, made ready to go. At 2 o'clock in the morning, he started out, with his knapsack stuffed with more books and manuscripts than clothes. A raw, dank mist hung over the city. Not a soul was to be seen in the street through which he passed. All around him, the gates and doors were marked with the crosses which showed that there, people lay ill or had died of the plague. Even in broad and winding Meatmonger's Street, as the street leading from the Round Tower to the King's Palace was called then, there was not a man to be seen. Suddenly, a large hearse came rumbling by. The driver cracked his whip to urge his horses into a gallop, for the wagon was crammed with corpses. The young student covered his face with his hands and breathed the fumes of strong spirits which he carried in a brass boxed sponge. From a grog shop in one of the streets came the sound of songs and forced laughter. Men were drinking the night away in an effort to forget that death stood at their door, beckoning to them to come with him and join the other dead men in the hearse. The student hurried on to Castle Bridge, where 2 small boats were moored. One of them was just about to cast off and quit the plague-ridden city. If the Lord spares out lives and the wind serves us, we shall sail to Grönsund on Falster, the captain said, and he asked the name of this student who wanted to go with them. Ludwig Holberg, the student said, and at that time it sounded like any other name. Now it resounds as one of Denmark's proudest names, but he was then only a young student and unknown. The boat slipped past the castle, and before daybreak they came to the open sea. A light breeze sprang up, and the sails filled. The student sat down with the wind in his face and fell asleep. And that wasn't exactly an advisable thing to do. On the third morning, the boat was already at Falster. "Do you know of anyone in this place with whom I can live cheaply?" Holberg asked the captain. "I believe you had best go to the ferryman's wife at Bora House," he said. "If you want to be polite, call her Mother Søren Sørensen-Müller, but she may turn angry if you show her too much politeness. Her husband is under arrest for some crime or other, and she runs the ferry herself. What fists she has!" The student shouldered his knapsack and went to the ferry house. The door was not locked, so he lifted the latch and entered a brick-floored room in which a large folding bed with a big furred cover was the most noticeable piece of furniture. A white hen, with her chickens around her, was tied to the bedstead. She had upset her drinking dish, and water ran across the floor. No one was there or in the next room, except a little child who lay in a cradle. The ferry boat came back with only one person on board. Whether man or woman was hard to say. This person was wrapped in a great cloak with a hood that covered the head. When the boat was docked, it was a woman who entered the room. She had an impressive air as she straightened up and looked at him. Two proud eyes were set under her dark brows. It was Mother Søren, the ferryman's wife, though rooks, crows, and jackdaws could scream out another name by which we would know her better. Glum she looked, and little enough she cared for talk, but it was settled that the student would stay and board with her for an undetermined time until things went well again in Copenhagen. Now and then, some honest fellows from the neighboring town dropped in at the ferry house. Among them were Frank, the cutler, and Sivert, the customs collector, who came to drink a mug of ale and to chat with the student. He was a thoughtful young man who knew what's what, as they said. He read Latin and Greek and was well posted in many fields of knowledge. "The less one knows, the lighter his burden," said Mother Søren. One day, when Holberg watched her wash clothes in strong lye and chop up knotty stumps for firewood, he told her, "You work too hard." "That's my business," she said. "Have you had to toil and slave this way ever since you were a child?" "Read the answer in my hands," she said, and showed him her two hands, small but strong and hard, with broken nails. "You know how to read. Read them." At Christmas time, there was a heavy snowfall. The cold made itself at home, and the winds blew as bitterly as if they were dashing acid in people's faces. Mother Søren didn't care. She flung on her cloak, drew up the hood, and went about her business. When the house grew dark early in the afternoon, she would throw pine knots on the fire and sit by it to darn her stockings, for she had no one to do it for her. As evening came on, she talked with the student more than she usually did. She spoke of her husband. By accident, he killed a captain from Dragor, and for this they put him in chains and sentenced him to 3 years of hard labor on the King's Island. He is only an ordinary sailor, so the law must take its course, you know. The law applies to the upper classes too, Holberg said. Do you believe that?" Mother Søren stared into the fire and then went on. "Do you know the story of K. Lika, who ordered one of his churches torn down? When Mads, the pastor, thundered from the pulpit against this, he had Mads clapped in irons and thrown in prison. Then he appointed himself judge, found Mads guilty, condemned him, and had his head struck off. That was no accident. Yet K. Lika was never punished. He was within his right, according to the custom of his time," Holberg said. "We have come a long way since then. Try to make fools believe you." Mother Søren got up and went into the next room where Tosin, her little child, lay in the cradle. When she had tidied and aired the cradle, she made the student's bed. He had the big furred cover, for though he was born in Norway, he felt the cold more than she did. New Year's Day dawned clear and sunny. It was so cold that the snowdrifts were hard enough for one to walk across them. The bells in the village were ringing for church, as student Holberg wrapped himself in his heavy cloak to set off for town. Rooks flew screeching over Burra House, and so did the crows and jackdaws. They made such a racket that you could scarcely hear the bells. Mother Søren stood outside, filling a brass kettle with snow to melt over the fire for drinking water. She gazed up at the dark swarm of birds and thought her own thoughts. Student Holberg went to church, and on his way back he passed the house of Sivert, the customs collector. Sivert invited him in to warm himself from a bowl of mulled ale, sweetened with syrup and ginger. They started to talk about Mother Søren, but the customs collector knew little about her. Indeed, there were few who did. "She is not a native of Falster," he said, "and she has probably seen better days. Her husband is a common sailor with a violent temper. He killed a captain on Dragor, and though he used to beat his wife, she always sticks up for him." "I would never stand for that," said the customs collector's wife. "I too come of better stock. My father wove stockings for the king." "So naturally you married one of the king's officers," Holberg said with a bow to her husband. 12th night came, and Mother Søren lighted for Holberg a candle of the 3 kings, that is, 3 small tallow candles, which she herself had prepared. "A candle for each man," said Holberg. "Each man?" she exclaimed, and looked at him hard. "Each of the wise men from the east," Holberg said. "Oh, that's how you meant it," she said, and sat in silence for a while. But on that evening of the 3 kings, he learned a great deal about her that he had not known. "You are fond of the man you are wedded to," Holberg said, "yet people tell me he daily mistreated you. Gee, that concerns no one but me," Mother Søren declared. "The blows would have done me good had they fallen when I was a child. Now they probably fall for my sins. I only know the good he has done me." She stood up straight. "When I lay ill and weak among the sand dunes, and no one would come near me except perhaps the rooks, the crows, and the jackdaws, who came to pick at me, he carried me in his arms and got hard words for bringing such a find on board his ship. I do not come of sickly stock, so I recovered. All of us have our faults, and Søren has his. One must not judge the horse by his halter. With him I have led a more pleasant life than I did with him, whom they called the highest and most gallant one of all the king's men. I have been married to Governor Gildenløv, half-brother to the king. Afterward I took Paladire. Good or bad, each has his own way, and I have mine. That was a long story, and now you know it." Mother Søren went out of the room. So this was Marie Grubbe, so strangely does the ball of fortune turn. She did not live to see many more feasts of the Three Kings. Holberg wrote that she died in June 1716, but he did not write, for he did not know that when Mother Søren, as they called her, lay dead in Bora House, a flock of large black birds flew over the roof in silence. They did not scream, and it was as if they knew that at funerals one must be quiet. As soon as she was in her grave, the birds departed. But on that same evening the birds were seen in enormous numbers over her old estate in Jutland. Rooks, crows, and jackdaws screamed to each other as if they had much to tell. Perhaps they croaked of him who robbed them of their eggs and young ones when he was a boy, the peasant boy who received an iron garter on the king's island, and also of the high-born young lady who died a fairy woman at Grönsund. Bra, bra, they croaked, and bra, bra, di, the whole tribe croaked when the old castle was torn down. And this they cry still, though there is nothing left to croak about, said the parish clerk when he told the story. The family died out, the castle was torn down, and where it stood, the new hen house now stands, with its gilded weathercock on the roof and chicken Grethe inside. There she sits, well satisfied with her cozy residence, for if she had not come here, she would have gone to the workhouse. The pigeons cooed above her, the turkeys clucked, and the ducks quacked around her. No one knew her, they said. She had no relatives. By an act of charity she came here, and children she had none. Nevertheless, she had ancestors, though she did not know of them, nor did the parish clerk, for all the manuscripts he had in his table drawer. But one of the old crows knew, and he told about it. From its mother and its grandmother, it had heard tell of chicken Grethe's mother and grandmother, whom we know too. We know how, as a child, she rode over the drawbridge and looked about proudly, as if the whole world and all the bird nests in it belonged to her. We also saw her on the sand dunes, and last at the ferry house. Her granddaughter, last of her line, had come home again where the old castle had stood, and where the wild birds croaked. But she sat among her tame fowls, known by them and on friendly terms with them. Chicken Grethe had nothing more to wish for. She was happy to die, and old enough to die. Grave, grave, the crows croaked, and chicken Grethe was buried in a good grave. No one knows where it lies except the old crow, if he isn't dead too. Now we know the story of the old castle and of all chicken Grethe's family. A rose from Homer's grave. All across the lands of the East, every song and every whisper beneath the moon tells of the eternal love between the nightingale and the rose. In the deep, starlit hours, when the gardens are silent and the air itself seems to listen, the nightingale pours out his heart to the fragrant queen of flowers. His wings tremble with passion as he sings, and his music floats through the jasmine-scented night, tender and sorrowful, like a prayer woven from sound and longing. Not far from ancient Smyrna, where the merchant leads his solemn caravan through the pine-clad paths, their camels bending proud necks under the weight of silks and spices, there stands a hedge of wild roses. The ground there is sacred, touched by the breath of forgotten gods and the footsteps of poets long returned to dust. In those high boughs above the road, a gentle turtle-dove makes her dwelling, her feathers glinting in the sun like the inside of a seashell, soft and opaline. And beneath those trees, amidst the fragrance of pine and earth, there blooms a rose more radiant than all her sisters, a blossom of such perfection that even the morning dew seemed unworthy to rest upon her petals. To her, the nightingale sang. Night after night his song rose like incense into the quiet heavens. Songs of love, of hope, of yearning. He sang of the joy that lives only to suffer, of beauty that withers even as it blooms. His melody trembled through the twilight, yet the rose remained still and silent. Not a single dewdrop gathered on her leaves to mirror his sorrow. She stood proud and distant, her fragrance like a queen's perfume, beautiful, untouchable, and cold. At last, when his voice grew faint from unreturned devotion, the rose bent her head toward a small mound of stones beside the path. Her soft voice rustled like wind through petals. "Here," she said, "rests the greatest singer the world has ever known. Over his tomb shall I breathe my perfume, and upon it shall my leaves fall when storms scatter them. He who once sang of Troy became earth, and from that earth I have sprung. I am a rose from the grave of Homer, born of immortal dust. Shall I then open my heart to a nightingale, however sweet his voice?" And so the proud flower turned away. The nightingale, hearing her words, sang one last song, a song so pure and full of sorrow that the air itself seemed to tremble. When the final note faded, his little heart broke, and he fell lifeless among the stones. A caravan passed by soon after, merchants with their camels and dark-skinned servants, the bells on the animals tinkling faintly in the still heat. Among them was a child, the son of the camel driver. Seeing the fallen bird, he knelt and cradled it gently in his hands. The boy's eyes were wide with wonder as he laid the songster to rest within the grave of the ancient poet. Then the child went on his way, and the rose trembled in the soft wind, her leaves shivering as though she wept without tears. Evening came. The sun sank behind the mountains, staining the horizon crimson as if the sky itself had bled. The rose folded her petals close, like hands clasped in prayer, and drifted into a dream. In her dream, the world was golden with sunlight. A group of travelers approached, strangers from faraway lands, who had come on a pilgrimage to honor the grave of Homer. Among them was a minstrel from the north, a land of glaciers and silent forests, where the aurora paints the sky with living light. He bent over the rose, marveling at her beauty, and plucked her carefully. Between the pages of his book, he placed her, whispering, "A rose from the grave of Homer." He carried her across the seas to his distant homeland, where the air was cold and the nights endless. There, in his home of mist and music, he opened his book and gazed at her faded petals with reverence. The rose, though pressed and lifeless, felt his breath upon her and thought she could still hear the faint echo of his words. She faded with grief, dreaming always of her warm Asiatic home, and yet proud to lie between the leaves of a poet's work. Then she awoke from that dream. The dawn wind stirred her petals, and a single drop of dew, clear as a tear, fell upon the mound that held the nightingale's bones. The sun rose higher, casting its fire upon the garden, and once more the rose lifted her head. Never had she been so lovely. The warmth of the morning filled her with a strange peace, as though love and sorrow had both been transformed into light. The day grew long and hot. The air quivered over the stones. And then, footsteps again. Pilgrims, like those she had seen in her vision, came walking softly through the sacred place. Among them was another poet from the distant north. His eyes were kind, and when he saw her, he smiled as though he had found something both holy and familiar. He plucked the rose gently, pressed his lips upon her fragrant heart, and carried her away toward the realm of clouds and northern lights. There she now lies, embalmed between the pages of his Iliad, a fragile relic of the south, a blossom born of Homer's dust. And when he opens the book, his voice murmurs softly, just as she once dreamed. Here is a rose from the grave of Homer, and though no breath stirs her now, though her petals are dry and still, deep within the hush of eternity, the rose still listens, and the nightingale still sings. The races, a prize, or rather 2 prizes, a great one and a small one, had been awarded for the greatest swiftness in running, not in a single race, but for the whole year. I obtained the first prize, said the hare. Justice must still be carried out, even when one has relations and good friends among the prize committee. But that the snail should have received the second prize, I consider almost an insult to myself. No, said the fence rail, who had been a witness at the distribution of prizes. There should be some consideration for industry and perseverance. I have heard many respectable people say so, and I can quite understand it. The snail certainly took half a year to get over the threshold of the door, but he injured himself and broke his collarbone by the haste he made. He gave himself up entirely to the race and ran with his house on his back, which was all, of course, very praiseworthy, and therefore he obtained the second prize. I think I ought to have had some consideration, too, said the swallow. I should imagine no one can be swifter in soaring and flight than I am, and how far I have been. Far, far away. Yes, that is your misfortune, said the fence rail. You are so fickle, so unsettled. You must always be traveling about into foreign lands when the cold commences here. You have no love of fatherland in you. There can be no consideration for you. But now, if I have been lying the whole winter in the moor, said the swallow, and suppose I slept the whole time, would that be taken into account? Bring a certificate from the old moor hen, said he, that you have slept away half your time in fatherland. Then you will be treated with some consideration. I deserved the first prize, and not the second, said the snail. I know so much, at least, that the hare only ran from cowardice, and because he thought there was danger in delay. I, on the other hand, made running the business of my life, and have become a cripple in the service. If anyone had a first prize, it ought to have been myself. But I do not understand chattering and boasting. On the contrary, I despise it. And the snail spat at them with contempt. I am able to affirm, with word of oath, that each prize, at least those for which I voted, was given with just and proper consideration, said the old boundary post in the wood, who was a member of the committee of judges. I always act with due order, consideration, and calculation. 7 times have I already had the honor to be present at the distribution of the prizes and to vote. But today is the first time I have been able to carry out my will. I always reckon the first prize by going through the alphabet from the beginning, and the second by going through from the end. Be so kind as to give me your attention, and I will explain to you how I reckon from the beginning. The 8th letter from A is H, and there we have H for hare. Therefore I awarded to the hare the first prize. The 8th letter from the end of the alphabet is S, and therefore the snail received the second prize. Next year, the letter I will have its turn for the first prize, and the letter R for the second. I should really have voted for myself, said the mule, if I had not been one of the judges on the committee. Not only the rapidity with which advance is made, but every other quality should have due consideration, as, for instance, how much weight a candidate is able to draw. But I have not brought this quality forward now, nor the sagacity of the hare in his flight, nor the cunning with which he suddenly springs aside and doubles to lead people on a false track, thinking he has concealed himself. No, there is something else on which more stress should be laid, and which ought not be left unnoticed. I mean that which mankind call the beautiful. It is on the beautiful that I particularly fix my eyes. I observed the well-grown ears of the hare. It is a pleasure to me to observe how long they are. It seemed as if I saw myself again in the days of my childhood, and so I voted for the hare. La, Buzz, said the fly. There, I'm not going to make a long speech, but I wish to say something about hares. I have really overtaken more than one hare when I have been seated on the engine in front of a railway train. I often do so. One can then so easily judge of one's own swiftness. Not long ago, I crushed the hind legs of a young hare. He had been running a long time before the engine. He had no idea that I was traveling there. At last, he had to stop in his career, and the engine ran over his hind legs and crushed them, for I set upon it. I left him lying there and rode on farther. I call that conquering him, but I do not want the prize. It really seems to me, thought the wild rose, though she did not express her opinion aloud. It is not in her nature to do so, though it would have been quite as well if she had. It certainly seems to me that the sunbeam ought to have had the honor of receiving the first prize. The sunbeam flies in a few minutes along the immeasurable path from the sun to us. It arrives in such strength that all nature awakes to loveliness and beauty. We roses blush and exhale fragrance in its presence. Our worshipful judges don't appear to have noticed this at all. Were I the sunbeam, I would give each one of them a sunstroke, but that would only make them mad, and they are mad enough already. I only hope, continued the rose, that peace may reign in the wood. It is glorious to bloom, to be fragrant, and to live in story and in song. The sunbeam will outlive us all. What is the first prize? Asked the earthworm, who had overslept the time, and only now came up. It contains a free admission to a cabbage garden, replied the mule. I proposed that as one of the prizes, the hare most decidedly must have it, and I, as an active and thoughtful member of the committee, took especial care that the prize should be one of advantage to him. So now he is provided for. The snail can now sit on the fence and lick up moss and sunshine. He has also been appointed one of the first judges of swiftness in racing. It is worth much to know that one of the numbers is a man of talent in the thing men call a committee. I must say I expect much in the future. We have already made such a good beginning.